Chapter 8:21. With their speed, it would only take them a quarter of an hour to finish the journey. It would be a new record. Both of them chased on the water surface, and Ning Xuemore was always a few feet ahead of Feng Jiasin. The small island was soon in sight. Ning Xuemore jumped up first and Feng Jiasin followed behind. She was a little surprised and felt that she had the help of a deity. Of course, she would never say it out loud. After a while, both of them found what they wanted to pick. Each of them carried a watermelon-sized fruit and ran back the way they came. This time, Ning Xuemore was still in front and Feng Jiasin followed behind. Both of them went into the water almost at the same time. Once Feng Jiasin entered the water, she felt the wind that was carrying her and her heart calmed down. She used all her strength to chase after her. Soon, she finally caught up with Ning Xuemore. Looking at Ning Xuemore's footsteps, she suddenly had an evil thought. This girl was the biggest enemy she had ever met in her life. She might as well kill her right here and now to prevent future troubles. Her heart moved slightly and her palms made a gesture in her sleeves. Suddenly, she pointed at Ning Xuemore. Ning Xuemore was running when she suddenly heard the sound of a sharp blade breaking through the air. She turned her head and her expression changed slightly. A large number of fine needles flew from behind her. They attacked her like lightning. Those fine needles were shining with light blue light. Apparently, they were highly poisonous. Needless to say, these hidden weapons were released by Feng Jiasin. This little white lotus actually wanted to kill her and wanted to kill her. No matter how fast Ning Xuemore was, she was still on the water surface. Naturally, she couldn't be compared to the speed of these hidden weapons. Seeing that those fine needles were about to surround Ning Xuemore, Feng Jiasin's lips revealed a vicious smile. Those who went against her, those who blocked her way, all of them had to die. These children of high officials and nobles all deserved to die. They should all make way for a commoner like her. This way, the world would be fair. After releasing the concealed weapon, she felt proud of herself. Suddenly, she felt the wind under her feet suddenly shake, causing her to stagger and almost fall into the water. She hurriedly steadied herself on a lotus leaf and faintly felt that the wind that was helping her suddenly disappear. Feng Jiasin's heart sank. Could it be that the heavens were not helping her? Shouldn't the heavens help a commoner like her? Humph, even if he didn't help her, it didn't matter. As long as she killed that eyesore of a girl, she could still become the ancestor's disciple. She wanted to be at the top and trample everyone beneath her feet. She wanted to be the strongest person in this world. She wanted to have a group of servants and a formation of servants. She wanted to be a real princess. All of her dreams were focused on this trip to the Sun Moon sect. Thus, she was willing to pay any price to achieve her goal. Feng Jiasin lightly jumped and landed on another lotus leaf. Then, she looked at Ning Xuemore with a trace of a smile, waiting for her to scream or fall into the water. But when she saw it, she was stunned. Ning Xuemore was still standing there perfectly fine. In her palm, there was a long green whip, and the silver needles on the whip were sparkling. It turned out that at that moment, Ning Xuemore had quickly pulled out the vine whip on her body. Those fine needles shot onto her long whip, but she herself was not injured at all. It's impolite not to reciprocate. I'll return it to you. Ning Xuemore sneered. With a shake of her long whip, the fine needles on the whip shot back like lightning. The speed was twice as fast as the ones Feng Jiasin shot at her just now. Feng Jiasin was so frightened that her expression changed greatly. Those needles were hers, so she naturally knew the poison on them. Once they touched blood, they would kill. Once they were hit, there would be no chance of rescue. Chapter 8:22. At this time, Feng Jiasin couldn't care about anything else. She suddenly bent down and those fine needles brushed past her scalp. She managed to dodge the hidden weapon, but she was on the surface of the water after all. The soft lotus leaves under her feet could not withstand her weight at all. She plunged into the water with a splash. By the time she came out of the water, dripping wet, Ning Xuemore had already run far away. Feng Jiasin's face was ashen. Her mind was blank, defeated. She was defeated. She suddenly punched the surface of the water. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew past her, causing her to shiver. Then, Her body seemed to be pulled into the air and she was directly pulled to the surface of the water. Then, the gust of wind carried her forward at a rapid speed. Ha ha ha, God was helping her. God was really helping her. Feng Jussin's body was swayed by the wind, but she almost laughed out loud. This time, her speed was much faster than before. She chased after Ning Xuemo like lightning. Ning Xuemo, on the other hand, wasn't so relaxed. While she was running, her legs suddenly tightened as if they were tied together and she couldn't take another step. The soft lotus leaves couldn't bear her weight and she inexplicably fell into the water. Her legs were bound by an invisible force. That inexplicable force was like ice threads, so cold that her legs were numb. Obviously, someone had plotted against her. She was after all an intelligent person. Originally, she was puzzled by Feng Jussin's sudden increase in speed. Now that she was plotted against by this inexplicable force, she instantly understood. That imposter Di Zun, he didn't want her to win, so he helped Feng Jussin and plotted against her. At this time, she naturally didn't have time to curse. The force that bound her should be the water threads, and her secondary psychokinesis was fire psychokinesis. She immediately used her fire psychokinesis to attack her legs. After a moment, the inexplicable force that bound her finally disappeared. She immediately jumped up from the water and landed on the lotus leaves. Just at this time, Feng Jussin flew past her. When she saw Ning Xuemo coming out of the water, she conjured a piece of soil and threw it at Ning Xuemo's feet, trying to trip her into the water again. Damn it, did they really think she was a sick cat just because she didn't show her might? A sharp light flashed in Ning Xuemo's eyes. The long whip flew close to the surface of the water and wrapped around Feng Jussin's ankle, pulling her into the water again. At the same time, Ning Xuemo's feet were once again bound by an unknown ice thread, and she was also pulled into the water. Ning Xuemo was furious. This time, it was much faster for her to remove the bindings. Soon, she surfaced on the surface of the water and looked around. She was naturally sensitive to invisible people. Even if she couldn't see where the invisible person was, she could still find them with her sixth sense. She suddenly lashed out with her whip at a lotus leaf. Bastard who schemed against others behind their backs. Despicable. I look down on you. When her whip was about to hit the lotus leaf, it seemed to be stopped by an invisible force, and the whip fell down halfway. Coincidentally, Feng Jussin had just popped her head out when Ning Xuemo's whip landed on her face. It made her scream. She jumped out of the water wet. Ning Xuemo, you plotted against me. Ning Xuemo also floated on the lotus leaf and sneered, you plotted against me first. She didn't want to be entangled with Feng Jussin, so she took the lead to run forward. As she ran, she scolded, invisible villain. Bastard who doesn't dare to show up in the open. Chapter 823. You only deserve to do these dirty things behind my back. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at? I look down on you. I look down on you 100 times. Ning Xuemo's voice was loud and clear. Her ability to do two things at once was not bad, and she didn't need to hold her breath when running with her psychokinesis. So while she was scolding happily, her running speed was not slow at all. She gradually approached the destination. Feng Jussin didn't know who Ning Xuemo was scolding, but she didn't want to think about it at this time. She was also running with all her might. Because she was not far from the shore, she didn't need to stop and think about the rest of the journey. After all, her psychokinesis was much higher than Ning Xuemo, and she was slightly ahead, so the two of them were running neck and neck at the end of the journey. Feng Jussin finally fell behind by a little bit. When there was only 3 feet left, Feng Jussin suddenly felt a force behind her that suddenly hit her. Her body flew straight up and fell to the shore. At the same time, Ning Xuemo also jumped up and landed on the shore. Both of their feet stepped on the shore at the same time. Not a second later, but Ning Xuemo landed on the ground, so there was no dust when she landed. Feng Jussin staggered after landing and directly lay on a big rock by the shore. Her forehead broke a layer of oily skin and blood oozed out. A draw. It was actually a draw. And it took less than a quarter of an hour to break the record again. Although Ning Xuemo fell into the water twice, her godlike speed won her extra points. She could be considered to have successfully passed this trial, and everyone could see that Ning Xuemo fell into the water in a strange way. Obviously, she was plotted against. Most people couldn't see the invisible person, so they thought that the culprit who caused Ning Xuemore to fall into the water was Feng Jiaxin. Although she and Ning Xuemore had a draw, people's impression of her was getting worse and worse. After she came to the shore, those companions who liked to surround her all stayed far away from her. No one even came to ask about her well-being. Almost everyone surrounded Ning Xuemore and congratulated her. Ning Xuemore's gaze fell on a certain spot in the water, and she pointed her pinky in that direction. Yelu Jing'an and his 4 fellow apprentice brothers also looked in that direction, a complicated light flashing in their eyes. The mind power of Di Zun's substitute was naturally very high. Although it was not as high as his master's, it had already broken through Earth rank level 10 and was already at Heaven rank level 1. In other words, he had already become an immortal. No one here was a match for him. When he was invisible, Yelu Jing'an and the others couldn't really see him, but after all, their cultivation was profound, and their perception was still very sharp, so they vaguely knew that person was in that direction. Others might not be able to see Feng Jiaxin's abnormality, but Yelu Jing'an and the others could. Yelu Jing'an was still okay. He knew half of the inside story. The other 4 people didn't know about this. They didn't expect that this person would secretly help Feng Jiaxin to deal with Ning Xuemore. They were puzzled for a moment. This person had always been loyal to the ancestor and had never had any second thoughts. He would always complete the tasks assigned to him by the ancestor with flying colors. Most of the time, he was almost the ancestor's spokesperson. His fellow apprentice brothers were also very respectful to him. Why would such a person use such a despicable method to deal with Ning Xuemore? This was really against his godhead. The ancestor who was standing on top of a lotus flower had a slightly green face. Although Ning Xuemore's attack didn't hit him, he felt as if he had been whipped several times. Chapter 824. Ever since he was born, he had never been scolded like this. Yet he couldn't make a sound. Ancestor naturally didn't want to help Ning Xuemore, he just wanted to use this matter to force her to leave. But he didn't expect that, even after he personally made a move, he still couldn't win against that scoundrel girl. Instead, she found out and scolded him. When Yelu Jing'an and the others looked over, although he knew they couldn't see him, he still felt somewhat uncomfortable. He was also somewhat puzzled. It was fine if Yelu Jing'an and the others could sense him, but how could a weak girl like Ning Xuemore see him? Logically speaking, it was impossible. Could it be that he hadn't used this skill for many years and it had deteriorated? But looking at the other disciples present, they clearly didn't sense him. His gaze was fixated on Ning Xuemore's body. Too many strange things had happened to her, making him unable to fathom what was going on. There must be a demon when things were abnormal. He had to guard against this little girl even more. This kind of person definitely couldn't stay by the ancestor's side. The ancestor belonged to this continent. His gaze shouldn't stay on one person, not to mention this person was a heavenly calamity. He turned around and directly disappeared again. Ning Xuemore had passed 2 martial stages in a row and was also somewhat tired. Under Yelu Jing'an's instructions, Feng Lianyi suggested Ning Xuemore to pass the Wen stage. Ning Xuemore naturally agreed. The Wen stage tested one's memory and comprehension ability. The person in charge of this stage was the Sun Moon sect's disciple who was known as the Memory Ghost Genius. He was famous for his crafty questions, who knew how many people had been defeated by his crude cultivation methods. Usually when the disciples passed this stage, because of the need for absolute silence, the other disciples would wait outside, so as not to disturb the person being tested. But when Ning Xuemore passed this stage, not far behind her stood a circle of people. There was no other way. Ning Xuemore had created 2 miracles in a row. Towards this 3rd stage, they really wanted to be spectators. Even those 5 masters didn't leave, actually following along. Of course, in order to not disturb Ning Xuemore as much as possible, they were still very quiet under Yelu Jing'an's restraint. Ning Xuemore felt a little bitter. The layout of this place was not like an examination hall, but more like a court. She sat alone behind a small table. Opposite her was an old judge, and not far behind her was a group of listeners. Although everyone was quietly playing the role of handsome men and beautiful women, all eyes were on her. She was the focal point. Ning Xuemore rested her chin on her hand and looked at the old man who set the questions. With a wave of his hand, a scroll slowly unfurled in the air. The scroll was densely packed with words. There were at least 400 to 500 words written on it. When Yelu Jing'an saw those words, his heart jumped. He couldn't help but glare at the old man. He wondered if this old man had been greeted by the ancestors' substitute in advance. The piece of calligraphy he showed was the most obscure and difficult to understand in the Sun Moon sect's secret art. The words and sentences were so difficult that even he felt a headache just looking at them. He didn't expect that he would take out this mental cultivation method to make things difficult for Ning Xuemore. What was even worse was that after this piece of calligraphy was opened, it only stayed there for half a minute before it slowly closed again. Those who were slow in reading didn't even finish reading the whole thing. That old examiner's eyes were bright as he stared at Ning Xuemore. "Little girl, you have to recite the 300 words of this essay to pass." The people behind all secretly sucked in a breath of cold air. Chapter 8:25. When the new disciples passed this test, they only needed to recite the first 200 words. Moreover, the words they recited were easy to understand. When the words were opened, they also saw it. Many people who achieved good results here silently recited it in their hearts after reading the words. They found that they couldn't recite 100 words. The disciple who was called a memory prodigy also quietly recited it. He found that he could remember close to 200 words, but couldn't remember anything after that. Now this old man wanted Ning Xuemore to recite 300 words. He was clearly deliberately making things difficult for her. It seemed that this Miss Ning was going to fall here. Yelu Jing'an stared at the old man and transmitted his voice. "Someone told you to deliberately make things difficult for her." The old man lowered his eyes and pretended not to hear. Yelu Jing'an understood. Only the few of them knew that the ancestor had a substitute. The others didn't know. If the substitute directly used the ancestor's name to instruct the old man would naturally obey unconditionally. This time, it was going to be bad. Yelu Jing'an couldn't help but look at Ning Xuemore and stare blankly. Ning Xuemore was actually taking a nap. According to the rules, this instant memory was limited to a quarter of an hour. If one couldn't recite it after a quarter of an hour, it would be considered a failure. Generally speaking, it was better to recite something immediately. The longer the time, the less one could remember and the harder it would be to recite it. Then what was Ning Xuemore doing? Could it be that she couldn't recite a single word? Impossible, right? Yelu Jing'an had taught Ning Xuemore martial arts for a few days. He knew that her memory was actually very strong. It was impossible that she couldn't recite a single word. Then what was she doing? Not only was he puzzled, the old master was also puzzled. He opened his sleepy eyes and stared at Ning Xuemore. "You can't recite a single word." Ning Xuemore yawned lazily. "The time limit for this test is a quarter of an hour, right?" "That's right. If you can't recite it in a quarter of an hour, you'll be eliminated." It's not even a quarter of an hour yet. Why are you so anxious?" Ning Xuemore asked back. The old master was speechless. He was speechless. After a while, he snorted and said, "After that moment, if you can't recite 300 words, you will be eliminated immediately." Ning Xuemore blinked her eyes and said slowly, "I heard that other people were able to recite the first 200 words when they passed this stage. Moreover, the words were very common. Is that right?" The old master choked and couldn't help but raise his head to look at the new disciples behind him. He couldn't deny it. Ning Xuemore's finger lightly tapped on the table. "Then why did you create such a cryptic article and let me read it for less than a minute and then make me recite the first 300 words? Are you deliberately making things difficult for me?" The old master didn't expect her to ask this question in front of him. He was at a loss for words. Usually, when he took the entrance exam here, which one of the disciples wasn't respectful and reverent? They didn't dare to offend him in the slightest, and they didn't even dare to say a single word against him. Who would have thought that the little girl in front of him would be so blunt and embarrass him? This was the first time he had experienced such embarrassment, so he was a little angry. He sneered and said, I have the final say here. If you can recite it, then do it quickly. If you can't, then get out. TSK, you're angry out of embarrassment. Ning Xuemore smiled. Suddenly, her face turned serious. Since you're an examiner, you should be impartial and upright. Treat all the candidates equally. You shouldn't be playing favoritism and deliberately making things difficult for a certain student. Chapter 8:26. How are you fit to be an examiner like this? How can you select a truly good disciple for the Sun Moon sect? If you do as you please and decide the future of these examinees based on your personal preferences, you might let a few mediocre people pass and reject the true elite. Ning Xuemore spoke harshly, her words causing the old master's face to turn pale. He had always done things fairly, but this time, the ancestor had personally instructed him, he couldn't go against it. Moreover, he couldn't mention the ancestor. This was the first time he had done something like this, and it was done in front of everyone's eyes. He didn't expect the little girl in front of him to have such a sharp tongue. This interrogation simply caused him to lose face all the way back to his grandmother's house. He couldn't help but look at Yelu Jing'an. Yelu Jing'an's eyes faintly revealed a trace of disapproval, but she didn't say anything. He steeled his heart. Little girl, you can't even recite a single word, right? That's why you're tangling with me like this. You want to attack me and ask me to be merciful and let you off. Haha, then you're wrong. At this moment, Ning Xuemore had already talked to him for so long, he reckoned that Ning Xuemore had already forgotten most of the things she had just memorized. He might as well be impartial. Originally, I wanted to test you as a genius, so the questions I gave you were slightly more difficult. I didn't expect you to actually be a mediocre person. Forget it, I'm too lazy to bicker with you. Didn't you ask for fairness? Then you'll be the same as the others. If you can recite the first 200 words of the passage just now, you'll pass. How about it? Just as he finished speaking, Helian Xiao, who had been listening from the back, couldn't help but say, this can't be considered fair. The passage just now was cryptic and hard to understand. Being able to recite the first 100 words is already very impressive. When he looked at it just now, he could still recite the first 150 words, but a long time had passed, and now he couldn't even recite the first 100 words. The others also nodded one after another. They couldn't recite the first 100 words now either. Only Feng Jiaoxin sneered. When we were taking the exam, we each had a passage. It's not necessarily much easier than this. Don't we still have to recite the first 200 words? I recited 250 word. There was pride in her voice. Feng Jiaoxin, even if you don't speak, no one will think you're a mute. Helian Xiao was furious. Why can't I speak? Why do you care what I say? Feng Jiaoxin also raised her head high. Just now, she had made a big scene, so everyone kept their distance from her, which made her very angry. She was used to being the center of attention wherever she went. Now that the center of attention had shifted, she felt particularly uncomfortable. He couldn't help but jump out from time to make his presence known. Ning Xuemore suddenly turned her head and glanced at her. 250? Feng Jiaoxin said proudly, of course it's 250. She finally realized that something was wrong. These words were used to scold people in the vast Sky Empire. Feng Jiaoxin was, after all, a citizen of the Fengyi Empire. Although she had occasionally heard these words, she didn't take them to heart. It was only after Zhongxian repeated his words that he realized what was going on. The people around her couldn't help but burst into laughter. It's 251 word. Not an idiot. Feng Jiaoxin blushed. However, no one paid any attention to her. Ning Xuemore curved her lips into a smile and didn't look at her anymore. The corners of Yelu Jing'an's lips couldn't help but curve. This little girl's tongue was vicious enough, and her reaction was sharp enough. Her martial arts were so high, she was indeed a rare genius. Chapter 8:27. Ari, this kind of person, Yelu Jing'an also wanted to take her in as his disciple. He really wanted to. The four apprentice brothers clearly had the same thoughts as him. All of their gazes landed on Ning Shuamore as they began to think of all kinds of ideas to snatch her away. It must be known that in this world, a good master was hard to find, but a true genius disciple was also hard to find. They had seen many smart children, but this was the first time they met someone like Ning Shuamore, so they naturally didn't want to let her go. A good exam turned out like this. The old master was very unhappy. He looked at the hourglass beside him and sneered, "The time is almost up. Since you can't recite it, then don't blame this old man for being impolite." Heavenly Cycle Dao. Ning Shuamore suddenly opened her mouth to recite. Her speed was fast and hard to say, but it was very clear, ringing in everyone's ears. That 500-word passage, she recited it without missing a single word. In a minute, she finished reciting the entire passage, and the hourglass had just reached the time. She had simply memorized it on the dot. Shock. It was the expression of everyone behind her. Stupefied. It was the old master's expression. He stared blankly for a moment and even reopened the passage to read it again, but he still couldn't find a single mistake in Ning Shuamore's recitation. She had recited the entire passage, and not the 300 words he had set. No, she must have recited this passage before. It doesn't count. Feng Jiaoshin couldn't help but scream. Everyone actually had this thought, feeling that Ning Shuamore must have recited this passage before, otherwise she wouldn't be able to recite it so well. Yelu Jing also couldn't help but look at Ning Shuamore, then glanced at the people around him and said indifferently, "No matter if she recited this passage before or not, since she has recited it, then." He hadn't even finished the words should count as a pass when Ning Shuamore gave a lazy smile. "If I say this is the first time I've seen this passage, you won't believe me. How about this? You can make a piece of text on the spot, and then let me recite it. How about that?" The old master was dumbfounded. When he heard this, he immediately said, "This old man has a mental cultivation method that I just wrote. I haven't shown it to anyone yet. Ning Shuamore, if you can read it for a moment and recite it, this old man will be sincerely convinced by you." Ning Shuamore's eyelashes curved again, and she agreed readily, "Okay." The old master immediately took out the text he had written and hung it in the air for about a minute like before. Then, he put it away. "You can recite it now." Ning Shuamore tapped her fingers on the table. "If I can still recite it word for word this time, what prize will you give me?" The old master was stunned and said, "If you can recite it all, I'm willing to take you as my master." "Are you serious?" "That's right. Everyone here can bear witness to this. As long as you can recite it, this old man will kneel down and take you as my master." The old master threw caution to the wind. Ning Shuamore smiled sweetly and looked at Yelu Jing'an and the other 4 masters. "Everyone is willing to be my witness." Yelu Jing'an and the others felt that it was inappropriate, but the possibility of it becoming a reality was close to zero, so they naturally nodded. Ning Shuamore smiled leisurely. "Then you'll have to prepare your knees. Less nonsense, recite it quickly." The old master was a bit impatient. Heaven's End has an elephant, but there is a God. Ning Shuamore began to recite word by word. Chapter 828. This time, Ning Shuamore's recitation speed was not fast. She enunciated each word clearly and each word was like a round jade bead ringing in everyone's ears. After 3 minutes, Ning Shuamore's last word fell and the hall fell into a dead silence. A total of 700 word. She recited a total of 700 word. Not a single word was correct. Not a single word was correct. The old master's expression was exaggerated and everyone was well aware of it. The hall was silent for 4 to 5 seconds. Everyone looked at Ning Shuamore as if they were looking at a monster. Ning Shuamore was not in a hurry. She smiled slightly and looked at the old master, waiting for him to continue. After a moment, the old master took a deep breath and suddenly knelt down in front of Ning Shuamore. "Master, I admit defeat wholeheartedly and willingly admit defeat." Everyone, Ning Shuamore smiled slightly and raised her hand to help him up. "Master, you don't have to be like this. Shuamore was just joking just now. You don't have to take it to heart. In the future, if Shuamore doesn't understand anything, I will ask you for advice." A few polite words removed the old master's awkwardness. The old master had never bowed down to anyone in his life, but at this moment, he was full of admiration for Ning Xuemo. Moreover, this girl knew when to stop and didn't push him to the brink of death. She had saved his face and made him feel grateful to her. This kind of girl's future would be limitless. Even if she became his master, he would not feel wronged. He bowed and said, "In the future, as long as master has orders, I will obey." Ning Xuemo saw that he was determined, so she didn't stop him. Everyone congratulated her one after another. Yelu Jing could not help but ask, "Xuemo, since you could recite it from the beginning, why did you take so long in the beginning?" Ning Xuemo coughed, "I was a little tired from the first 2 rounds, so I wanted to rest here for a while." Everyone. So this was the reason why she was stalling for time. "Xuemo, you're amazing. How in the world did you remember?" Helian Xiao's heart was filled with bewilderment. He felt that Ning Xuemo's memory ability was simply heaven-defying. Ning Xuemo smiled. "I know a special shorthand method." She had an amazing memory, and she had learned shorthand before. Back then, she was ordered to steal a lot of top-secret documents. Sometimes, she didn't have the conditions to take photos. Therefore, she basically relied on her exquisite brain to memorize things. She could quickly recite so many technical terms. The article written by the old teacher here was naturally not difficult for her. Shorthand. How do I do that? Helian Xiao was extremely curious. The others naturally had a curious look on their faces as well. Even Yelu Jing'an looked at her, his eyes full of inquiry. Ning Xuemo smiled. "This is a little complicated. I'll teach you this method when I have time." Almost everyone cheered. One had to know that cultivating martial arts required rote memorization. If they could really learn a method to quickly memorize things, it was naturally something they wished for. These children were also at the time when their thirst for knowledge was the strongest. They crowded around Ning Xuemo, chattering as they escorted her to the location of the 4th round. Yelu Jing'an and the other 4 disciples looked at each other. Everyone had made up their minds. If this little girl did not become the ancestor's disciple, even if they had to snatch her, they would personally snatch her to be their disciple. If they could not get this kind of disciple and could only watch as she was lost, then they would be struck by lightning. Chapter 829. The 4th checkpoint was also a martial checkpoint. Ning Xuemo didn't find it too strenuous to break through this checkpoint. This was a mechanism array. She was an expert in breaking arrays, so the array couldn't trap her. What delayed her was the endless demonic beasts inside the array. After all, she had broken through several checkpoints in succession. Her physical strength was greatly exhausted, and her body was injured. Therefore, it took her quite a bit of effort to break out of the array. Even so, her result was still impressive. She was faster than the record holder of this checkpoint, Helian Xiao, by a minute. When she came out of the array, she found that there were even more people waiting outside. Many people heard the news and came to watch the fun. Once she appeared, she was greeted with thunderous applause. The 5th checkpoint was a literary checkpoint. It tested a disciple's ability to comprehend the mantras. Because the old master had been abused as an example, the instructor for this checkpoint didn't deliberately make things difficult for her. The questions he gave her were also very standard. Ning Xuemo's ability to comprehend words was naturally very strong. Otherwise, when she heard the ancestor recite the mantra, she wouldn't have been able to immediately apply it and put it into action. She answered the middle-aged master's questions fluently. Naturally, she won another round of applause and naturally obtained a very high score. At this moment, more than 8 hours had passed since her bet with the ancestor's substitute. It was already time for dinner. Because she wanted to treat everyone equally and avoid being criticized by others, Ning Xuemo ate with the new disciples. The ancestor's 5 direct disciples, who usually didn't show up, also entered the kitchen. This really made the odd-job workers who were cooking for these disciples very excited. They also heard that Ning Xuemo had broken through 5 checkpoints in succession. Naturally, they were also full of admiration. They especially added a few more pieces of nutritious spiritual meat to Ning Xuemo's meal. Because time was tight, everyone didn't want to miss the fun, so they ate very quickly. Its master was so popular, so Karine was naturally very proud. It also ate a lot. Ning Xuemo didn't care much about the sixth checkpoint. Helian Xiao said that the sixth checkpoint wasn't difficult. As long as one's mind was firm, they could basically pass it. The number of people eliminated in this round was the least. It took him less than 2 hours to pass this stage. When Ning Xuemo arrived at the entrance of the sixth checkpoint, she was still 3 hours away from the stipulated 12 hours. It couldn't be helped. She passed the first few stages too quickly. Unless she deliberately wanted to rest, she didn't waste a single second. The last disciple who passed the sixth level didn't take more than 3 hours, so Ning Xuemo was very confident in passing this level. Of course, the others were also very confident that she would pass this stage. Yelu Jing'an had even prepared a celebratory banquet for her. The entrance to the sixth level was a cave. Everyone brought Ning Xuemo to the entrance of the cave and stopped. She was still the only one who could pass this level. Even Karine was not allowed to enter. Together with the others, it watched as Ning Xuemo walked into the cave, then lay down under a big tree to take a nap. Its injuries hadn't healed yet, so it took this opportunity to recuperate. Others might not be able to tell, but it was telepathic with Ning Xuemo after all. It could feel that its master was actually very tired, very tired. After all, not only did its master pass these 5 checkpoints, she also went through the dark forest's bewitching array with it. At that time, she used up more than half of her strength, suffered serious injuries, and lost so much blood. Chapter 830. Although Ning Xuemo's injury had been treated with the elixir, the blood she had lost could not be replenished in a short time. Karine clearly remembered that when it and its master were rushing out of the dark forest, she had cheered it up, "Little apple, we have to sleep after we get out. In order to have a good night's sleep, let's go." She and Karine did not expect that they would encounter such a situation after they came out. She was forced to take on the challenge of passing 6 levels in a row. Until now, she had not even had a good rest. Its master seemed to be indifferent to everything, but in fact, she was very strong. No matter how tired she was, she could act as if nothing had happened. 15 minutes passed, 30 minutes passed, and then an hour passed, but there was still no movement inside. Time went by minute, and finally, 2 hours passed. There was still no movement in the cave. The dark hole seemed to have swallowed all the people, including their bones. There were many people waiting outside the cave, and almost everyone was looking at each other. According to the girl's ability, she should be able to get out easily. She should not waste so much time. Could she have an accident in the cave? Karine could not wait any longer. Because Ning Xuemo had previously instructed him not to use telepathy to disturb her when she was breaking through the trials, so as to avoid distracting her, he obediently waited outside and didn't dare to use telepathy to ask her. It was getting closer and closer to the end time, but Ning Xuemo still did not want to come out. Karine finally tried to contact her with telepathy. "Master, master." There was no response. Karine was a little panicked. It tried to sense Ning Xuemo's condition. It could sense her state of mind. Strangely, her state of mind seemed to be a little strange. She seemed to be sad and sad. Karine tried to call her again and again, but there was no response. Karine was dumbfounded. What was going on? It was sure that its master was not in danger, but why was she not responding? Why did she not come out? It looked at the hourglass next to it. There was still 15 minutes to the end of the time. If its master did not come out, it was afraid that all its efforts would be in vain. At this time, it was already the second night watch. The people waiting outside began to whisper to each other and discuss. Some were worried, some were surprised, and of course, there were also those who were here to watch the show. He wished that Ning Xuemo would never come out again, for example, Feng Jiaxin, because her companions, who had originally surrounded her, had completely neglected her in the past few hours. At this moment, Feng Jiaxin felt that it was very much to her liking. She couldn't help but chuckle. It seems that girl is just SOSO. It was just a coincidence that I passed those stages. No one answered her, and the few companions who used to flatter her also kept their mouths shut. Feng Jiaxin was a little embarrassed. She looked at the hourglass and then looked at the Kirin. Her heart moved. Hey, Kirin, your master might have fainted inside and is waiting for someone to save her. Why don't you go in and take a look? Kirin was indeed flustered. Hearing her words, it was somewhat moved. It was about to move when Yelu Jing'an said in a low voice, "Don't act rashly. She must be the one to pass this trial. Once you go in, even if you don't help her, it means that she has loss." Kirin was shocked. Of course, it understood what it meant to lose. It immediately stopped and glared at Feng Jiaxin. Chapter 831. Feng Jiaxin still wanted to instigate, but Yelu Jing'an coldly glanced at her. This glance made Feng Jiaxin's heart turn cold, and she didn't dare to cause trouble again. Kirin didn't dare to go in, and could only secretly use telepathy to call out to its master. "Master, master, quickly come out. You can't lose, you have to take the Overlord as your master. You can't let Feng Jiaxin, this kind of villain, see you as a joke. Don't you still want to find Yi Qingwan for revenge? If you can't take her as your master, you can't become the strongest." Kirin repeatedly said in its heart. Looking at the time passing by in the hourglass, it almost wanted to cry. When Ning Xuemo was young, she was extremely afraid of the dark. No matter where she went, she liked to have lights on. Only when she stayed in a brightly lit place could she truly calm down. When she was young, even when she was sleeping, there was also a small light in the room. Later, when she participated in the special agent training, she went through a period of tough training and gradually overcame this bad habit of hers. However, it was only on the surface. At most, she could peacefully stay in the dark. Deep down, she still hated the dark. Usually, she also tried her best not to go to dark places. Only she knew about this bad habit of hers. Even her close friends, even her life and death comrades didn't realize it. And the last test was actually darkness. Complete darkness. The moment she entered the cave, she was plunged into complete darkness. Ning Xuemo tried her best to widen her eyes, but she couldn't see anything clearly. She put her hand close to her eyelids, but still couldn't see anything. This place was like a black hole in the universe, swallowing all light and sound. Yes, not only was this place dark, there was also no sound. It was terrifyingly quiet. She couldn't even hear the sound of her own breathing. She secretly cursed Helian Xiao in her heart. That rotten brat even told her that the cave of the sixth test was just a little dark. How was this just a little dark? It was simply the ultimate darkness. Such a dark and quiet place made one's heart flustered for no reason. Ning Xuemo groped her way forward. Helian Xiao said that once you entered the cave, you just had to keep walking forward and ignore everything else that appeared. Right now, she hadn't seen anything else, but this extreme darkness made her heart beat like thunder. The surroundings were too quiet. In order to break the silence, Ning Xuemo deliberately gasped for breath. Then, she was surprised to find that she couldn't hear her own breathing. She tried to speak again, but she couldn't hear anything. Could this cave be a black hole that could devour all light and sound? It was too strange. Who would have thought that the Sun Moon sect would actually have such a thing that defied science? Ning Xuemo's mentality was still relatively good. She suppressed the disgust and fear in her heart, stretched out her hands, and strode forward. She wanted to go out. Once she got out, she would succeed. She couldn't sense time in the cave, so she used her own breathing to judge the time that had passed. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, she suddenly heard a strange breathing sound. That sound was a little hurried, a little like the breathing of a baby who had a cold. This sudden breathing sound made Ning Xuemo's heart skip a beat. She held her breath. This should also be a test, right? Helian Xiao had said that one could hear all kinds of strange noises in the middle section of this place. As long as one maintained their original intentions and didn't get disturbed, it would be fine. The baby's breathing became louder and louder. She could even hear the baby's weak cries as if they were right next to her ears. Chapter 832. Damn it. Imitating a baby spirit. Ning Xuemo's heart quivered. She had even seen the village's old zombie. She could still smile and watch from the beginning to the end. Why would she be afraid of this small voice? Ah, this darkness is so comfortable. A young voice suddenly sounded in her ears. The voice was small and tender, like a baby who had just learned how to babble. The voice was a little shrill, as if it was very happy. The Sun Moon sect was really abnormal. Where did they get this baby's voice and play it here to scare people? Ning Xuemo cursed in her heart. Staying in the darkness, which she was most afraid of, was already hard enough. She didn't expect that they would make a child's voice to scare her. She simply opened her mouth and shouted, "Shut up. Do you think I'm scared? If you continue to play tricks here, I'll pull you out and throw you out. Woo-woo, mother, you're so violent." The baby's voice simply cried in a low voice. Ning Xuemo instantly felt goosebumps all over her body. Mother! She was still a virgin beauty. She didn't even have a boyfriend. How could she have a child? Little brat. Shut up. I'm not your mother. Don't try to confuse me, Ning Xuemo said sternly. Hehe, Momo, I'm in your stomach and will be born in the future. Of course you're my mother, Scram. I'm not the Virgin Mary. How can a virgin get pregnant? Ning Xuemo snorted. She felt a little strange. If the baby's voice was recorded in advance, how could it speak so smoothly? She was afraid that she would be bewitched by the voice, so she simply sealed her acupoints and shut off her hearing. This way, the world would be peaceful and she wouldn't have to listen to the strange baby's voice anymore. Hehe, silly child, do you think you can't hear me by shutting off your hearing? The baby's voice laughed. How could she still hear it? This voice was transmitted from the depths of her soul. Ning Xuemo's body suddenly stiffened. Her dantian suddenly heated up, and she said sternly, "Who are you? Where are you? Come out." After she shouted, no one answered. The baby's voice also disappeared. Motherfucker, trying to mystify things, Ning Xuemo cursed in her heart. She opened up her hearing and strode forward. Although she couldn't see, her sixth sense was still very sharp. If there were obstacles in front of her, she would be able to sense them in time and avoid them. Along the way, all kinds of monsters appeared in the cave from time to time. These monsters had strange shapes and sizes, and all of them were filled with murderous intent as they pounced on her. Ning Xuemo chanted the incantation in her heart. She could tell that these monsters were all illusory and not real. Her judgment was absolutely correct. When those monsters really pounced on her, they disappeared into thin air. She heaved a sigh of relief. According to Helian Xiao's explanation, this cave was a revolving cave. Whichever cave they entered from, they would eventually be able to exit from that cave. Just like those man-made ghost castles she had seen in modern times. She judged the distance based on her speed and felt that she had already covered 2/3 of the distance. She just had to work a little harder and she would be able to get out. After she got out, she would be able to rest. She was too tired. She was walking quickly when a red light suddenly flashed by the side of the cave. A man in red slowly appeared in front of her. He had picturesque eyebrows, fiery red clothes, and a gentle smile. Little Momo. Shue Ilan. Ning Xuemo was shocked. Chapter 833. She suddenly took a step back and unsheathed her sword. Shue Ilan, what are you doing here? She was on her guard as she pondered. How did this person appear here? Wasn't there a barrier around the Sun Moon sect's Buddha Lotus Mountain? Shue Ilan shouldn't be able to barge in, right? Even if he could barge in, the disciples of the Sun Moon sect shouldn't have been able to detect him. Could this be an illusion as well? Shue Ilan stared at her with his deep eyes. He stepped forward and slowly extended his hand toward her. Momo, come back with me. Come back my ass. Ning Xuemo slashed her sword at him. Get lost. Her sword pierced through Shue Ilan's wrist and fell into the void. Fuck. It was an illusion again. Ning Xuemo cursed under her breath. Since she knew that he was an illusion, she naturally didn't take it to heart. She raised her head and looked over. The red-robed Shwe Elan didn't disappear like the monsters from before. Instead, his figure became more and more real as he stood in front of her. In the pitch-black night, his figure seemed to be coated with a layer of faint fluorescent light. Even his eyebrows were so clear. His hand was still extended forward, but the smile on his lips had disappeared. His eyes dimmed. "Momo, I was wrong. Please forgive me." His tone was bitter and seemed to contain a strong sense of regret. "Please forgive me." She really saw a ghost. Shwe Elan actually showed such an affectionate expression to her. She really couldn't take it. Ning Xuemore slashed her sword at him again. "If you know you were wrong, then get lost. Don't disturb me again." Her sword slashed at Shwe Elan's head. She watched as he was split into two like mist, but immediately after, the two halves merged back together. His sleeves drooped down. "Momo, are you not willing to forgive me? The one I've always loved is you." Blood slowly flowed out of his eyes, but he still tried to hold her hand. "Momo, don't love him. You're my..." Ning Xuemore was about to go crazy. This illusion was too real. She almost believed that it was true. She looked at Shwe Elan's outstretched hand and decided to bump into it. Anyway, it was just an illusion. She couldn't let him block her path. She still had to pass the trial. Her entire body felt like it was on fire, and she watched helplessly as she passed through Shwe Elan's body. An illusion was just an illusion. It couldn't really block her way. After Ning Xuemore rushed over, she let out a sigh of relief and looked back. That guy, Shwe Elan, actually condensed behind her. However, this time, his whole body was covered in blood. Drops of blood continuously rolled down from his red clothes, making him look somewhat miserable. His back was still facing her, and he walked step by step into the darkness without looking back. His arms were still stretched out in front of him, as if he was hugging her. "Momo! Momo!" His voice was like a cuckoo weeping blood, sorrowful. This scene made Ning Xuemore's heart clench for no reason. A needle-like pain came from the depths of her heart. Her fingernails pierced into her palms, and the pain in her palms startled her back to her senses. She raised her hand and fiercely slapped her forehead. What was wrong with her? Seeing Shwe Elan like this, she felt a bit of heartache. Could it be that this illusion had the power to influence people's hearts? She shook her head and didn't want to think about it anymore. She continued to walk forward with large strides. After walking a few dozen meters, she suddenly seemed to have sensed something. She suddenly stopped and looked at the person who was slowly appearing not far away. His clothes were as white as snow, and his cold jade mask was suffused with an icy luster. His tall and straight figure was strangely familiar. Her heart trembled as if she was drowning. She blurted out, "Great God!" Chapter 834. This time, it was the white-clothed ancestor. He stood there quietly without speaking or moving. Was this an illusion or a real person? Ning Xuemore was a little uncertain. She took 2 steps forward and asked, "Great God, how are your injuries?" The man still stood there like an ice sculpture. His whole body seemed to be suffused with a cold chill. Ning Xuemore's heart suddenly felt cold. This was not the great God. The great God would not be so cold to her now. He was the substitute. Ning Xuemore suddenly took 2 steps back. "You are the substitute, right? What are you doing here? I know you don't want me to be the ancestor's disciple, but since you and I have made a bet, even if you are the ancestor's substitute, you should still keep your word. You shouldn't plot against a newcomer like me behind my back." She said a lot of reprimanding words, but the man still stood there. His pair of black eyes faintly fell on her body. They were as cold as ice, as if Xuemore was just a stranger to him. She didn't know why, but when she saw his eyes, Ning Xuemore's heart actually twisted. If she felt some pain in her heart when she saw Shwe Elan in such a sorry state, now that she saw the ancestor, her pain was actually 10 times worse. Pain, bitterness, helplessness, sadness, all kinds of negative emotions came overwhelming, drowning her whole body. Her nose was sour, and her mind was suddenly in a mess. She couldn't help but take 2 steps closer to him and reach out to him. You don't want to talk to me anymore?" A burst of icy coldness suddenly enveloped her. Ning Xuemo's vision turned black, and her body softly slid to the ground. The white-clothed man stood beside her for a moment, raised his hand to look at his palm, and slightly lowered his eyes. His move wouldn't take her life, but it was enough to make her sleep for 2 hours. After 2 hours, even if she rushed out immediately, she would still lose. But with this girl's intelligence, she shouldn't be confused by illusions. Just now, she seemed to have been in an illusion. What kind of illusion did she see? The white-clothed man was a little curious. He stretched out his finger to touch Ning Xuemo's forehead, but stopped halfway and slowly lowered his sleeve. Forget it. No matter what she saw, it had nothing to do with him or the ancestor. As long as she lost this time, she wouldn't be able to take Di Zun as her master, and he would have achieved his goal. There was no need for him to meddle in other people's business. He glanced at Ning Xuemo, who was lying on the ground. In a flash, he disappeared. Ning Xuemo was left lying motionless on the cold ground. Ning Xuemo suddenly found herself on a battlefield. There were a few tens of thousands of people fighting on the battlefield. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, smoke surged, and the flashes of various magic treasures frequently sliced apart human bodies and reaped lives. For some reason, she recognized that the people dressed in black were from the devil race, and the people fighting against them should be from the immortal cultivation sect. The sounds of killing, the sounds of weapons clashing, and screams filled everyone's ears. The scene of corpses strewn all over the place made people want to vomit. Then, Ning Xuemo saw that at the rear of the devil sect, there was a black palanquin surrounded by the devil race. In the palanquin, there was a red-clothed man with picturesque features. On his lap was a zither, and beside him sat a red-clothed girl with black hair covering her forehead. Ning Xuemo's heart couldn't help but move. This man and woman were actually Shui Yilan and Shui Yimo. Shui Yimo's small face didn't have much expression. She raised her head to look at the battlefield outside the palanquin, her charming face filled with indescribable weariness. Chapter 835. She also had a zither on her lap. It was the Blackwave zither. Shui Yilan was also looking outside, his eyes brimming with interest. A moment later, he tilted his head and chuckled at Shui Yimo. This time, these monkeys are a bit more powerful. Maybe we don't need to take action. Shui Yimo slightly nodded, but didn't say anything. Momo. Shui Yilan suddenly held her hand. Don't worry, I'm by your side. You don't need to worry about anything. Shui Yimo tilted her head and looked at him, pursing her lips. I'm not worried. There was no worry in her eyes, only boredom. She raised her hand and touched her hair. She had combed it into a slanted bun, giving her a kind of amorous feeling. But at this moment, the bun was a bit messy. She took out a mirror from somewhere and looked at herself, sighing. This bun is not good, it's messy again. Shui Yilan put the zither on his lap aside and sat cross-legged behind her. He took out an ivory comb. Don't worry, I'll comb it again for you. What kind of hairstyle do you want? He obviously often did this for her. He skillfully took apart her bun and combed it with his ivory comb. Her long hair hung down like a curtain of a waterfall. Shui Yilan gently held it in his hand, his eyes gentle. Momo, you're doing very well. Shui Yimo's eyes were looking outside, falling on a young girl on the battlefield. Her bun is very nice, I'll comb it like that. She pointed at the girl with her slender jade finger. Shui Yilan looked outside. Okay. Without saying anything else, he combed her hair. His fingers were very nimble. Almost in a moment, he had combed Shui Yimo's hair. Looking her up and down, he was finally satisfied. Momo, your hairstyle is really very beautiful. Shui Yimo looked at herself in the mirror, smiling. It's really good. Shui Yilan stared at her bright smile and suddenly sighed. Momo, only you can match this hairstyle. The others don't match. As soon as he finished speaking, the gossamer thread in his hand swiftly extended outwards. The gossamer thread first burrowed into the ground, and a moment later, it suddenly flew out from the side of the girl on the battlefield and strangled her neck like a viper. Shui Yimo was completely oblivious to all of this. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, then raised her head to look outside. Her eyes searched for that girl's shadow, and she saw the scene of that girl being strangled to death. Her expression changed slightly as she looked at Shui-Elan beside her. Why did you kill her? Shui-Elan retracted his hand, and the gossamer hair flew back into his palm and disappeared. He smiled at her, his smile as warm as the spring breeze. Momo, you are unique. No other woman can be like you. Ning Xuemore felt as if she had the perspective of a god. These two people were clearly staying in the airtight sedan, but she could actually see their every move. She rubbed her eyebrows, feeling as if she was still watching a show. When Ning Xuemore woke up, she couldn't remember everything that had happened in her dream, but she could still analyze it in her dream. She could even link the previous dreams together. She could already see that Shui-Elan had clearly fallen in love with Shui Yimo, and that he was protecting her to the point of perversion. Shui Yimo, on the other hand, didn't seem to have any feelings for Shui-Elan. She only saw him as a companion, a shadow guard, and a trustworthy subordinate. Chapter 836. She didn't seem to approve of Shui-Elan casually killing that little girl, but she didn't say anything. That little girl was originally an enemy, so killing her was a matter of course. Shui Yimo seemed a little sleepy, so she simply laid down on Shui-Elan's body, nestling on his shoulder. Lan Shan, I'm a little tired, so I'll rest first. Call me when you need me. Shui-Elan carefully sat up, making it easier for her to lean on. Okay, don't worry, I'll take care of everything. Shui Yimo's small face revealed a shallow smile. She slightly closed her eyes and murmured, the best thing I've done in my life was to pick you up that year. Shui-Elan stretched out his arm and carefully pulled her closer to his body. He raised his hand and stroked her smooth hair. Momo, the luckiest thing in my life was to meet you, and to be able to accompany you like this. Shui Yimo fell asleep very quickly, and soon her breathing became even. Shui-Elan stared at her sleeping face for a moment, then gently smiled and whispered, Momo, I'll definitely take you as my wife. Shui Yimo didn't sleep very well. She suddenly wrinkled her beautiful eyebrows, and her hands convulsively clenched the blanket under her body. I hate this, Momo. Momo. Shui-Elan stretched out his arm and quietly hugged her. Don't be afraid, I'm here. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. He looked down at her beautiful face, his eyelashes slightly trembling, and his fingers quietly clenched. He was nervous. Ning Xuemore instantly saw through his mood. He wanted to. Shui-Elan paused for a moment, then finally leaned down and kissed her lips. A snow-white finger suddenly appeared between their lips, touching Shui-Elan's lips. Shui-Elan stiffened. Shui Yimo, who was in his embrace, opened her eyes. Her pair of big black eyes were misty. Shui-Elan, you've crossed the line. Shui-Elan simply held her hand and licked her fingertips. Momo, I've already said that I want to take you as my wife. Lord Devil Ancestor also agreed. No. Shui Yimo's pretty face sank. She sat up straight and brushed her hair. I've already said that I won't let you be my husband. Why? Shui-Elan's hand. Momo, I've loved you for so many years. Do you think I'm not worthy of you? Do you think I've been abandoned? Shui-Elan. Shui Yimo spoke. You know that's not what I mean. With your current cultivation, you can return to Elan. A few days ago, wasn't the Elan king crawling at your feet? Then you didn't refuse me because we're not compatible. Of course not. Then what is the reason? Because. Shui Yimo suddenly stopped, her face showing a fidgety expression. You don't need to ask. In any case, I won't marry you. I don't want to marry anyone. She looked at him seriously. Isn't it good for us to be like this? Why do we have to talk about marriage? Shui-Elan slowly sat up straight, lowered his eyes, and fiddled with the zither on his knees, no longer speaking. Shui Yimo paused for a moment, then suddenly sighed. Shui-Elan, I can't delay you any longer. Shui-Elan's body shook, looking at her. What? Shui Yimo smiled faintly. You're the king of the snowflood dragons. You should go back and inherit your throne. Chapter 837. Staying by my side as my secret guard is indeed an insult to you. This time, after we return to the demon world, you should leave. Xuemore seemed relieved after saying this. Shui Yilan looked at her, his eyes unfathomable. You know my background? Shui Yimo gently plucked the strings. Not only do I know that you are the king of the Snow Mermaid clan, but I also know that you were accidentally struck into an egg during a tribulation and fell into the hands of the Snake clan. Because of the tribulation, you lost your memories of being the king of the Snow Mermaid clan. You only thought that you were a small snake that no one liked, until I picked you up and made you my secret guard for 300 years. These years have indeed wronged you, Your Majesty. The shock on Shui Yilan's face gradually disappeared. He looked at her. Momo, you secretly investigated me? Shui Yimo slightly shook her head. A year ago, the great protector of the Snow Mermaid clan came to see you disguised as a member of the demon race. I also happened to be looking for you, so I accidentally heard your secret. Shui Yilan raised his hand and held her hand. Momo, I have never felt wronged staying by your side. You want to drive me away? Shui Yimo withdrew her hand. The Snow Mermaid clan has been looking for you for so many years. You really should go back. After all, you are the king. Shui Yilan slightly smiled. Okay, after we return this time, I will go to the Snow Mermaid clan. Momo, are you willing to leave me? Shui Yimo lowered her eyes, still plucking the strings. Her voice was indifferent. There is nothing to be reluctant about. After you leave, other secret guards will appear. Shui Yilan's face slightly changed. He raised his hand as if he wanted to do something, but in the end, he didn't do it. He looked at her in a daze. Momo, is your heart made of stone? You don't feel reluctant about leaving me? Shui Yimo didn't speak anymore. She sat there like a cold stone statue carved out of flames. At this moment, Ning Shuamore suddenly understood what she was thinking in her heart. She wanted to be the demon ancestor. To be the demon ancestor, she had to abandon the 7 emotions and 6 desires. She couldn't love anyone, couldn't like anyone. The things she liked, the things she loved, and the things she cared about would all be lost in the end. Since that was the case, she might as well not like or love him. That way, he wouldn't feel heartache when he lost her, and wouldn't feel sad when he was betrayed. Perhaps she had been too close to Shui Yilan all these years. She had gotten used to his company and his meticulous care. She had started to care about him and couldn't let him go. Shui Yilan saw that she was like a statue and didn't speak. He suddenly smiled bitterly and said, I understand. Shui Yimo slightly closed her eyes. Her beautiful face was still expressionless like a porcelain doll. She indifferently said, Shui Yilan, after we return, you can leave. I'm tired of you. Shui Yilan's fingers trembled as he sucked in a deep breath. Are you trying to drive me away? What if I insist on staying in the demon race? Shui Yimo still didn't open her eyes. She indifferently said, if you want to stay, it's up to you. But I won't let you be my shadow guard anymore. I don't want a shadow guard who has other thoughts about me. Shui Yilan. His fingers trembled violently. After a long time, he said, What if I take back all my thoughts about you and just stay by your side like this? Momo, you can't leave me. You see, I've already learned how to play the Blackwave zither. I can kill people for you, so you won't be stained with blood. Momo, I can only be your shadow guard. I won't ask for anything else. Chapter 839. Shui Yilan sat next to Shui Yimo, watching her play without saying a word, as if he had already become infatuated. Ding ding dong dong. Just as Shui Yimo's zither was about to break through the other side's defensive line, the sound of a zither suddenly came from the other side's camp. The sound of the zither was like a flowing spring on a golden roof, like the golden flowers falling from the sky when Buddha was talking about sutras. The sound of the zither dispersed the dark clouds in the sky, allowing the sun to shine in all directions. Shui Yimo's expression changed greatly. She suddenly raised her head, looking towards the other side's camp. She saw a white-clothed supreme god sitting on a soft cloud, a zither on his knees, playing with his eyes downcast. The heavenly wind fluttered his wide white robe, making him the only bright color on this battlefield dyed with white bones and blood. Shui Yimo's eyes seemed to be surging with wind and clouds. She looked at the white-clothed supreme god, her eyes growing wider and wider. Her movements couldn't help but slow down. She had been looking for him for hundreds of years, but she never thought that they would meet again here. She never thought that she would stand on the opposite side of him. Her zither music was slightly disrupted, but the other side's zither music took the opportunity to attack, wave after wave like a great tide. That pale white zither light wave and her dark blue zither light wave collided and entangled in the air. The dark blue light wave was obviously not a match, retreating little by little, slowly being suppressed. Momo, careful. Shui Yilan was very anxious, immediately playing the zither in his bosom. First of all, his skill was indeed not enough, and he didn't specialize in zither music. Second of all, the zither in his bosom wasn't an ancient divine object, so he simply couldn't contend against the other side. A moment later, his face paled, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing him spit out blood, Shui Yimo seemed to wake up from a dream. Her somewhat chaotic thoughts were immediately pulled back. She immediately reorganized her spirit, her fingers dancing, playing the black wave zither. The dark blue zither light wave suddenly became twice as bright, desperately colliding with the pale white zither music. Ning Xuemore didn't think that the battle between two musical instruments could be so fierce. Whether it was the cultivators from the Immortal sect or the Devil sect, they were all desperately resisting the other side's zither music. From time to time, someone couldn't resist and turned into ashes. Amidst the surging sound of the zither, the white clouds in the sky danced wildly, and the air was almost distorted. Countless withered branches, leaves, rocks, and dirt were sent flying by the zither music, but they were stirred by an invisible force in the air and turned into nothingness. Perhaps it was due to the fact that Snowy Yimo's black hair was blown about by the wind, and even her robe was fluttering in the wind. She pursed her lips tightly and did not retreat in the slightest under the overwhelming power of the other party's Guqin. Her usually dead eyes showed a hint of excitement. She kept staring at the man in the enemy camp without blinking. She was clearly trying her best. The tearing notes she played made Shui Yilan, who was beside her, feel uncomfortable. His face was even paler than hers. As for the other party, the white-robed man had been sitting upright on the cloud. His movements were as smooth as flowing water, without the slightest hesitation. It was as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. After a stalemate with Snowy Clothes Mo's zither for 4 to 5 minutes, his brows suddenly moved. His pair of eyes looked towards the palanquin over here. Shui Yimo was also looking at him, and their gazes seemed to meet in the air. Actually, this was Shui Yimo's misconception. Her palanquin was specially made. The palanquin was surrounded by a barrier, and the heavy curtain of the palanquin blocked all lines of sight. She could see him through the special channel in the palanquin, but he couldn't see Shui Yimo. Chapter 840. The white-clothed great god sat on the cloud and suddenly floated towards Shui Yimo naturally. The demon soldiers did their best to stop him from approaching. However, this person's skill was too strong. Before he could make another move, anyone who approached him would be blown away by the sound of the zither and turned into ashes in the air. Devil ancestor? Why don't you show yourself and fight with me? The white-clothed man opened his mouth. His voice was like Kunlun's cold jade, tinkling in the wind. Shui Yimo's face paled. She didn't open her mouth and continued to urge the zither strings, playing a murderous sound to stop him from approaching. Her faint blue sound waves attacked him, but before they could reach him, they were bounced off by the barrier around his body. He moved faster and faster towards her. It seemed that he wanted to break her palanquin and see the devil ancestor's true face. In this world, no one had ever seen the devil ancestor's true face, not even Shui Yimo. She looked on helplessly as the white-clothed man got closer and closer. He was about to see her. Did he still recognize her? Did he recognize the little fox who liked his flute so much and was almost eaten by him? Her eyes were astonishingly bright. Although she knew that as long as he got close to her and broke her palanquin, she still secretly looked forward to it. Clang. One of the strings of the black wave zither broke. She was no match for the other's zither music. Her body swayed and a line of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Shwer Elan suddenly rushed over. Braving the danger of being injured by her zither music, he rushed to her side and snatched the blackwave zither from her lap. Shwer Yimo obviously didn't expect that Shwer Elan, whom she had always trusted, would make a move on her. She was also completely focused on Shwer Elan's plan. Not only did he snatch her zither, but he also sealed her acupuncture point. Momo, take care. He only said 4 words before he suddenly broke the roof of the palanquin with his palm and rushed out like a flame. Shwer Yimo suddenly opened her eyes wide. She wanted to get up, but her acupuncture points were sealed and she couldn't get up for a while. She looked on helplessly as Shwer Elan jumped away from her and pretended to be her to meet the white-clothed great god. She heard Shwer Elan laugh. I didn't expect there to be a master of music in the celestial realm. Let me see. He was no match for him. Even though she possessed half of the demon ancestor's power, she had no way of surviving against this white-clothed god, let alone Shwer Elan, who had only practiced the zither for a few decades. Shwer Yimo was both shocked and angry. She opened her mouth to shout, but no sound came out. He would die. He would die if he went up against that person. Shwer Elan. Lan Shan. You can't die. You mustn't die. Shwer Yimo's body began to tremble as she attacked her acupoints with all her might. Silly child. A voice floated into her ears. Shwer Yimo stiffened, her eyes frantically spinning. Devil ancestor. Before she could do anything else, a gust of wind suddenly appeared on the ground. The palanquin she was sitting in suddenly spun in the air and fell into a huge whirlpool that suddenly appeared in the sky. Ning Xuemore finally realized that everything she saw seemed to be from Shwer Yimo's point of view. Because when the palanquin was sucked into the whirlpool, the world in front of her eyes also spun. After the world spun, when she calmed down, she found that the scene had changed. A dark forest, a dusky sky, a 7-colored poisonous fog floating in the air, and a dark hall. This was the scene of the demon world that Ning Xuemore often saw in her dreams. She saw the red-clothed girl blow into a magnificent hall like a gust of wind. There was no one else in the hall except for a badly mutilated man lying on a brocade couch in the middle of the hall. Beside him was the black wave zither with its 7 broken strings. Chapter 841. Shwer Elan. She called out and slowly walked over. The one lying there was no telling whether he was dead or alive was Shwer Elan. His red clothes were completely soaked with blood, and even his eyelashes were covered with a layer of scabs. His lips and face were as pale as paper, so fragile that it seemed like a gentle pinch would crush him into powder. Lan Shan, Shwer Elan, Shwer Elan. Shwer Elan threw herself in front of him, holding his hand tightly. Wake up. Wake up. Her eyes were wide open, staring at his face. Besides his body being still soft, he didn't move at all, not even breathing. Ning Xuemore, who was watching from the sidelines, suddenly had a feeling that she was going to cry. She had also lost her closest companion. That person was her partner. She didn't know how many times they had gone through life and death together. That person also loved her, but she didn't have any feelings for him, so she couldn't reciprocate his feelings. Ning Xuemore also deliberately ignored that person. Later on, during a mission, that person, in order to protect Ning Xuemore, took a bullet for her and died in her arms. Ning Xuemore still remembered that feeling. It was a kind of heart-wrenching pain. She remembered that she didn't want to let go of his body that was gradually turning cold. In the end, she even risked her life to carry his body back. Shwer Elan's feelings towards Shwer Elan were even more complicated. She also seemed to like Shwer Elan, but for some special reason, she didn't dare to like him. He was the only person she trusted in the demon realm, the only person who was so good to her. Now that he suddenly met with a mishap, how could Shwer Elan not be sad? Shwer Elan held Shwer Elan's hand tightly, calling him over and over again, using the cleansing technique to clean up the bloodstains on his body. Shwer Elan didn't cry, but Ning Xuemore felt a deep sadness, as if a blunt knife was slowly cutting her. Mo, are you sad? The faintly discernible voice that alternated between male and female rang out again. It was still alternating between left and right, making people unable to figure out the direction. Shui Yimo abruptly raised her head and fell to her knees. Lord Devil Ancestor, please save him. Mo, do you like him? That voice was both cold and fiery. Shui Yimo clenched her fists inside her sleeves. No, Mo doesn't. Silly child, you've reached the age where you can get married. If you really like him, you can marry him. The voice guided her patiently. No. I don't like him, I don't want to marry him. Shui Yimo's voice suddenly became sharp, as if she was afraid that the Devil Ancestor would really arrange a marriage for her. Since you don't like him, why are you so sad? Lord Devil Ancestor, he is my secret guard. He has followed me for 300 years. He has always taken good care of me, and his martial arts are also very good. With him by Mo's side, there's a lot less to worry about. Mo just wants him to be a good shadow guard, that's all. Mo, if you want a secret guard, you can have a lot. Since he's dead, you can have a better one. But he's the only one who can play the black wave zither. Shui Yimo retorted, kowtowing again. Lord Devil Ancestor, I beg you to save him. With him by Elan's side, Elan has a lot less to worry about. He really is a very, very good talent. I beg you, I beg you. Her voice sounded calm, but listening carefully, there was a trace of trembling. Chapter 842. The Devil Ancestor's voice suddenly disappeared. Shui Yimo kowtowed a few more times and begged a few more times, but she still didn't get a response from that voice. She didn't know how much time had passed, and she didn't know how many times she had kowtowed, but the Devil Ancestor still didn't reply. Shui Yimo slowly stood up and returned to Shui Elan's side, then slowly sat down. After such a long delay, Shui Elan's face became even paler. He lay there like a statue, motionless. She sat next to Shui Elan, looking down at him. After a while, she suddenly turned around and untied her messy hair. Her long hair flowed down, brushing against his cheek. Shui Elan, my hair is messy. I don't know how to comb that unique hairstyle. Get up and comb it for me. Shui Elan naturally didn't move. Shui Yimo looked at him for a moment, as if waiting for him to wake up. But the result of waiting was ultimately disappointment. Her eyes gradually reddened. Shui Elan, I want you to comb my hair for me. Do you hear me? She didn't know where she had found an ivory comb, but she put it in his palm, then held his hand to comb her long hair. She originally didn't know how to take care of her hair, so holding someone else's hand like this made it even more inconvenient. She combed for a long time, but her hair was still messy. She finally let go of Shui Elan's hand, no longer caring about her hair. She bowed her head and looked at him for a long time. Her big eyes were as black as a black hole, without the slightest trace of light. It was unknown what she was thinking. Shui Elan, you said you wouldn't ignore me. Her voice choked again. She had already helped Shui Elan clean up the blood on his body. Apart from a few holes in his clothes, he didn't seem to be in a sorry state. The room was deathly silent. She held his hand tightly, motionless and silent. Another moment passed. Shui Elan. She spoke softly, as if she was afraid of waking him up from his beautiful dream. I tried my best, but I couldn't save you. I really couldn't save you. Shui Elan, I told you to leave, but you didn't. Now, you can't leave even if you want to. Shui Yimo's voice trembled slightly. After a moment, she slowly opened her mouth again. You can go. Leaving like this is also good. Let me give you a ride. She touched the black wave zither beside her and cut her wrist. Blood dripped onto the zither like a fountain. The broken strings suddenly reconnected automatically in the blood and slowly restored to their original appearance. She placed the zither on her lap and glanced at him. Shui Elan. Don't reincarnate into the wrong body in your next life. Don't. Come back to me again. Ding. The sound of a zither resounded, and a faint blue zither wave flew towards Shui Elan. Bang. A dark light flashed in midair, blocking the faint blue zither wave. Lord Devil Ancestor. Shui Yimo suddenly turned her head, looking into the void. He's not completely hopeless. That faintly discernible voice resounded again. At the same time, a dark fog gushed out from the depths of the hall, completely enveloping Shwe Ilan, who was lying on the bed. Lord Devil Ancestor, you're willing to help. Shwe Yimo's eyes flashed as she looked into the depths of the hall. Mo, you're my daughter after all. How could I completely abandon you? The voice sighed softly, like a loving mother. Shwe Yimo's eyes shone even brighter. However, his injuries are too heavy. The zither music damaged his soul root. If you want to save him, you need something. Only if you can get that thing, I can restore him to his original state. Chapter 843. What is it? Shwe Yimo stood up, her eyes sparkling. Ning Xuemo, who had been standing in the shadows, suddenly felt her heart skip a beat. She suddenly felt an indescribable fear. She was afraid of hearing the devil ancestor say that thing. Master, master, master. Kirin's voice suddenly came from the distant horizon. That voice seemed to be separated by thousands of mountains and rivers, and could not be heard clearly. Little apple? Ning Xuemo suddenly quivered. Her head suddenly felt dizzy. When she came back to her senses, she found herself lying on the ground. Her surroundings were still as dark as ink, as if she had reached the end of a black hole. Master. Master. Master, it's almost time. Come out quickly. Woo-woo, come out quickly. Answer, little apple. Kirin's voice became exceptionally clear in her mind. Ning Xuemo's somewhat dizzy mind suddenly became clear. Heavens, she was still in the middle of breaking through. How did she fall asleep? She jumped up. Little apple, don't worry, I'm coming out. She used telepathy to respond to Kirin, and ran forward with flying step. Outside the cave, the people who were waiting anxiously saw that the hourglass was about to reach its end. Some people, such as Helian Xiao, anxiously walked around in circles. Some people, such as Feng Jiaoxin, rejoiced in other people's misfortune. Countless pairs of eyes stared in the direction of the cave entrance. When the last pinch of sand was about to drip down, Feng Jiaoxin laughed and was about to make a sarcastic remark. Suddenly, she heard the cheers of the people around her. She raised her head to look, and her expression suddenly changed. A red shadow flashed at the entrance of the cave, and a person rushed out like lightning. In the blink of an eye, she appeared in front of everyone. At the same time, the last grain of sand in the hourglass fell. She had broken through. It was exactly 3 hours. Although she didn't achieve the best result in this trial, and was even the worst among the disciples who passed, she had still managed to break through. 6 trials, she really used 12 hours to break through. She became the second person to use 12 hours to break through 6 trials, and the first person was a special genius whose psychokinesis had reached Earth rank level 6. Ning Xuemo, on the other hand, was only at the second rank of Earth realm. Even before that, she was a well-known trash. A miracle. She had created a miracle. Almost everyone present cheered. There were even a few hot-blooded young men and women who rushed over, lifted Ning Xuemo up and threw her into the air, and then again, the little Chelene was also happily jumping up and down outside the crowd. It couldn't squeeze into the crowd and became very anxious. Suddenly, it turned around and transformed into a blue cat. Like a wisp of smoke, it scuttled onto the shoulders of the crowd and jumped into Ning Xuemo's bosom. Master! Master! Ha 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 ha! It was scary enough for a cat to laugh like a lunatic. But who cares at this time? Yelu Jing'an and his fellow apprentices looked at each other and couldn't help but smile. This girl could finally stay openly. He seemed to have thought of something. He raised his hand and took out a sound transmission talisman. He picked it up and said in a straightforward manner, "She passed." She didn't pass by a hair. I saw. A cold voice came from the other side. Did you see it? Yelu Jing'an seemed to have sensed something and looked towards a small mountain peak in the distance. Faintly, a young man as cold as ice and snow stood there. Under the moonlight, there was a hint of loneliness. She really is a good seedling. Don't make things difficult for her. Yelu Jing'an spoke again, his tone serious. This kind of talent can't be met in a few hundred years. Chapter 844. That person didn't reply. Yelu Jing'an raised his head and looked in that direction, but there was no trace of that person on the bare mountain peak. He looked at the sky, then looked at the group of overjoyed children. Then, he used the sound transmission technique to communicate with his senior and junior brothers, and saw the four of them nod. Only then did he call over Feng Lianyi, instruct him with a few words, then turned and left. Feng Lianyi raised his hand with a smile. All right, it's really not early anymore. You all still have a tough battle to fight tomorrow, so if you want to celebrate, wait until tomorrow night. Then, he smiled at Ning Xuemore. Miss Ning, from today onwards, you're an official member of the Sun Moon sect. Whether the ancestor accepts you or not, you won't be rejected by the Sun Moon sect. Ning Xuemore smiled. Although she was extremely tired, she was still in high spirits. Great God, I didn't go through your back door, I relied on my own ability to stay in the Sun Moon sect. She quietly clenched the snow-white sound transmission talisman in her hand, and a smile appeared on her lips. All the disciples dispersed, and the cave entrance returned to its usual tranquility. A moment later, a person appeared at the cave entrance. This person was Yelu Jing'an, who had already left. He almost didn't think and strode into the cave. When he was 3/4 of the way into the cave, he stopped and stood there, as if sensing something, and a light flashed in his eyes. His guess wasn't wrong. Ning Xuemore had been plotted against here. However, that person knew how to hold back, and didn't take her life, only making her faint. Fortunately, she was very lucky and woke up in time. This little girl was indeed someone, sleeping here and still being able to get out in time. However, it seemed that that person had already begun to use unscrupulous means to prevent Ning Xuemore from becoming a disciple. Now that Ning Xuemore had passed all 6 tests, that person might use other means later. This night, Ning Xuemore rested in a house specially used to receive the new disciples. Since she had already become one of them, before she decided on a master, she naturally had to live together with the new disciples to prevent others from gossiping. Ning Xuemore wasn't a person who was afraid of gossip, but she didn't want to bring gossip to the overlord. Therefore, she took the initiative to request that everything be done step by step. What she didn't know was that this one decision of hers made Yelu Jing'an busy for a long time. Her identity was special, and Yelu Jing'an was afraid that something would happen to her. Originally, she wanted to arrange for her to return to Tianyin Peak. Hearing her decision, he thought for a moment and felt that it was right. Thus, he had someone arrange for her to stay in an abode. On the surface, her abode didn't look any different from the neighboring abodes of the other disciples. In fact, there were layers of restrictions set up outside the abode. These layers of restrictions were set up by Yelu Jing'an and his senior and junior brothers. It contained their combined strength, so its might was naturally not to be underestimated. Under their heavy restrictions, even if a fly wanted to fly into her room, Yelu Jing'an would immediately know and would be able to rush over in time. Ning Xuemore was indeed exhausted. After she came to the abode, she took a bath and went to bed. She slept like a log and didn't know that outside the abode, Yelu Jing'an and the rest didn't sleep at all. They were lying in ambush at various corners and only took turns to take a nap. Feng Jiaxin was really sullen today. After she finished washing up, she laid on the bed and couldn't sleep for a long time. She was born in a poor family. When she was 10 years old, she was brought into the palace and enjoyed an excellent life. Chapter 845. Although Feng Jiaxin enjoyed riches and honor, she lived among high-ranking officials, so a sense of inferiority was born in her bones. However, she was also a genius, which made her proud. The combination of inferiority and pride caused her to be cynical and have a dual personality. She always felt that everyone in this world was inferior to her, and that she was just reincarnated into the wrong body. Although the Empress doted on her, Feng Jiaxin always felt that the Empress's kindness was not sincere. She was crazily jealous of the Empress's daughter, the real princess. Later, she used underhanded means to force the real princess out. After the real princess committed suicide by jumping into a river, the Empress aged more than 10 years overnight, and she was not as good to her as before. On the surface, she was still respectful to the Empress, but in her heart, she began to feel indignant. She felt that the Empress had wronged a genius like her. Feng Jiaxin felt that with her aptitude, she was more than qualified to be the Empress. She had already made up her mind. After coming to the Sun Moon sect and becoming a disciple, she would return to Fengyi country and try to control the Empress, making her pass the throne to herself. She also wanted to be the Empress and completely change her situation. This was also the reason why she desperately wanted to become the ancestor's disciple. The ancestor was a person of virtue and prestige, and was the god of this continent. If his disciple wanted to usurp the throne and become the Empress, the people of Fengyi country would not disagree. In the 3 years in the imperial palace, she learned to behave gracefully and calmly. She was gentle and courteous to everyone. When she first stepped into the Sun Moon sect, Feng Jiaxin won the favor of most people, and also made countless people notice her. Unknowingly, she became the focus of everyone's attention, which made her proud and satisfied. In order to eliminate a strong opponent, she schemed against Helian Xiao. However, Helian Xiao's personality was straightforward, and he disdained to lower himself to the same level as a girl, so her scheme was not obvious. If Ning Xuemore did not appear, she would have succeeded. But damn it, Ning Xuemore just had to appear. She stole all the limelight from Feng Jiaxin in a few hours, and also made her make a fool of herself, causing her to fall from the heaven that everyone sought after to the hell that almost no one cared about. This made her hate Ning Xuemore so much that her teeth itched, but there was nothing she could do. This time, there was an 80 to 90% chance that her plan to take Di Zun as her master would fail. While she was tossing and turning in bed, a voice as cold as ice rang in her ears. "Do you want to become stronger?" She was stunned and immediately pricked up her ears. That voice had come in through secret voice sending, and it rang coldly in her ears. "If you want to become stronger and become the champion, then come out. Walk to your left and enter the bamboo forest 1,300 feet away." Feng Jiaxin's heart jumped. Although she didn't know who that person was, this person gave her hope. Steeling herself, she jumped off the bed and ran out. The bamboo forest was dark, and the moonlight was cold. A tall and straight figure stood there with his back facing her. He was dressed in a black robe that seemed to blend into the night. Feng Jiaxin cautiously approached him step by step and stopped about 10 meters away from him. "Senior, did you call me?" That person said indifferently. "Do you want to beat her?" Feng Jiaxin paused for a moment. She was still more cautious, so she answered slyly, "I will try my best to fight for it." "You can't beat her." That person rudely interrupted her. Feng Jiaxin choked. Junior's psychokinesis is Earth rank level 5, but she's only level 2. When it comes to a real competition, it's not just about psychokinesis. No matter who achieved good results, they would want to share it with their family and friends. She was the same. She didn't know why, but she thought of Yi Feng and sighed. If only Yi Feng hadn't left. She then shook her head. But he has to leave. Yang Ziyuan and Jiyu Xian are going to get married. Although he doesn't want to give up, he still has to go and take a look. I hope he won't be too shocked. Karine was stunned and puzzled. Yang Ziyuan and Jiyu Xian are going to get married? It can't be, right? Isn't she going to risk her life to save Yi Feng? I think that girl is very anxious. How can she still be in the mood to get married? Chapter 847. Ning Xuemore paused. What did you say? Yang Ziyuan went to save Yi Feng? When? Could it be something that happened after she and Yi Feng were rescued? That's not right. When Yi Feng was imprisoned, he overheard the conversation between Yi Qinghuan's maids and found out about Yang Ziyuan's wedding date. That meant that Yang Ziyuan's wedding date was before, and she and Yi Feng were saved later. Something was strange. There must be something strange that she didn't know about. Why did Yang Ziyuan not go to Yi Feng and get engaged instead? Ning Xuemore didn't have many friends in this world, but she cared more about Yang Ziyuan and Yi Feng. If Yang Ziyuan was willing to marry Jiyu Xian, it would be fine, but if she was forced, it would be her lifelong regret. Although Yi Feng had rushed over, he might not have the courage to question Yang Ziyuan, given his personality of wanting to swallow everything down even if it meant losing his teeth. Most likely, he was hiding in the dark and watching his sweetheart marry someone else. Ning Xuemo took a deep breath. It was fine if she didn't know about this, but now that she knew, she had to go to Daliang City to investigate. She secretly counted the days. There were still 3 days until Yang Ziyuan's wedding. If she left immediately after settling the matter of apprenticeship, she should be able to arrive a day earlier. While she was thinking, Helian Xiao's voice came from outside. Ning Xuemo, are you awake? It's time to gather. Ning Xuemo couldn't help but laugh. Although Helian Xiao was the son of a prince, he wasn't tainted by the intrigue in the prince's residence. He had a fiery and bright personality, so he was a friend worth making. She responded, tied it up and walked out. Today, she was wearing a bright purple dress and a snow-white cloak. Her long hair was casually draped over her shoulders like a waterfall. She had rested for the night, and her complexion looked much better. It was obvious that she was charming and beautiful. Helian Xiao was slightly stunned when he saw her like this. Ning Xuemo was in a hurry to pass the test yesterday, so she didn't have time to dress up after coming out. In addition, she lost too much blood, so her face was pale and bloodless, so she was in a sorry state yesterday. She wasn't the prettiest among the group of girls. Today, she had almost recovered and dressed up carefully, so she looked stunning. Helian Xiao, who was used to seeing beauties, was stunned for a moment. He was only 13 years old and had yet to grow. Currently, he was a bit shorter than Ning Xuemo. In Ning Xuemo's eyes, he was still a child, therefore, she patted him on his shoulder. Let's go. She took the lead and walked out first. After walking for a dozen steps, they saw Feng Jusin walking out with another girl. The moment both sides met, the young girl greeted Helian Xiao and Ning Xuemo. Feng Jusin, on the other hand, looked at Ning Xuemo and Helian Xiao with a smile that was not a smile. Suddenly, she smiled at Ning Xuemo. Miss Ning, actually, I have something that you might not like to hear. Your husband, Mr. Han, is a peerless master. You came here to be his disciple, so you're rather neglecting what's near at hand and seeking what's far away. She looked at Helian Xiao again. Prince Helian, don't blame me for not reminding you. Mr. Han is obsessed with cleanliness. His concubines are not allowed to be touched by anyone. What nonsense are you talking about? Miss Ning and I are innocent. Don't be so filthy. Helian Xiao was angry. I'm just reminding you because we're from the same sect. I don't mean anything else. Feng Jusin smiled and turned to leave. The girl next to her looked at Ning Xuemo and then looked at Helian Xiao. Prince Helian, Miss Ning, please don't mind. Chapter 848. The princess is just a little outspoken. She doesn't have any ill intentions. The girl turned around and chased after Feng Jusin. Helian Xiao was indignant. Why didn't I notice that she was so sarcastic? Ning Xuemo smiled carelessly. This kind of white lotus will only reveal her true nature when she is provoked. Helian Xiao looked at her with a complicated gaze. You don't care? Ning Xuemo said, if you are bitten by a dog, will you bite back? Of course not. Helian Xiao answered. That's it. If you are bitten by a dog, either you don't bicker with it and laugh it off, or you give it a good beating. Don't you think so? Ning Xuemo's eyes flashed with coldness. That's right. Helian Xiao nodded. His eyes looked at Ning Xuemo with admiration. Usually, when faced with this kind of situation, most people would choose to retort. But if they really quarreled here because of a few words of gossip, it would be unavoidably degrading. What's more, what she said about Han Shanyu was indeed true. Ning Xuemo was too lazy to lower herself to her level at this time. She was also too lazy to argue with this kind of person. If there was no accident, that little girl was crying at the back. However, she had hit her hard yesterday. She was already like a wilted cucumber. After sleeping for a night, she suddenly became so aggressive, as if she had some kind of victory in her hands. Could it be that she still had some tricks up her sleeve? Ning Xuemo thought of the person who secretly helped Feng Jiaxin during the 4th round of the competition. Her fingers secretly clenched. Could it be that that person still wanted to help Feng Jiaxin secretly? That was really possible. Why did this fake Di Zun reject her so much? Did he help Feng Jiaxin because he admired her? Did he have a relationship with her? Or did he simply find her, Ning Xuemo, an eyesore? Although that person's martial arts was not as good as Di Zun's, it was not low either. If he were to side with Feng Jiaxin, it would be a very troublesome matter. She couldn't help but hold the snow-white sound-transmitting amulet hidden in her sleeve. This was given to her by Shenjiuli, and it was full of spiritual power. No matter what time it was, it always had a cool and comfortable aura. Shenjiuli had once told her that she would be able to contact him at any time using this sound-transmitting talisman. When he was in seclusion, he could choose not to answer other people's calls, but he would definitely answer her calls. If she were to use it when she was in danger. She had only received his voice transmission once and had never used it to look for him. His injuries were extremely serious. She later understood. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so weak in the castle. He must have gone into seclusion to recuperate. People who were recuperating in seclusion hated being disturbed the most. Therefore, she didn't want to disturb him with the sound-transmitting talisman unless it was an emergency. What's more, she wanted to rely on her own ability to win everyone's recognition and become his disciple openly. She didn't want to rely on Di Zun's backdoor. Shenjiuli seemed to trust this substitute very much. Otherwise, he wouldn't have entrusted her to that substitute. This substitute's usual performance must be very commendable, without any flaws. Moreover, he was extremely loyal to Di Zun, so Di Zun didn't guard against him at all. Di Zun probably didn't expect that this substitute would treat her like this. She raised her hand and rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She was already very low-key in dealing with people. Why were there always big shots jumping out to make things difficult for her? Who did she provoke? Chapter 849. Ning Xuemo let go of the sound transmission talisman. Forget it. If no one deliberately messed with her today, then she would fight for that position with her own ability. Whether she won or lost, she did not want to rely on others. As for the possibility that someone might use underhanded methods, that person had already used underhanded methods to trick her twice, and she did not lose either time, right? It was better not to disturb his seclusion. She believed that once he recovered, he would definitely come personally to oversee things. Now that he could not come, it seemed that it was still not possible. Hundreds of thoughts flashed through her mind, and she was momentarily lost in her thoughts. She did not even notice that Kirin was tugging at her skirt. Bang! She directly bumped into someone's embrace. Damn, she was too distracted. Ning Xuemo was embarrassed. I'm sorry. Ning Xuemo subconsciously apologized. Just as she was about to take a step back, the person she bumped into held her arm. Xuemo. This voice was extremely familiar. Ning Xuemo raised her head in astonishment and looked into a pair of deep, dark eyes. She was startled, and her brows immediately relaxed. Your Highness. The person she bumped into was actually Ji Yunhuang, whom she had not seen for many days. Today, he was wearing the white robe of the Sun Moon sect's 3rd-generation direct disciple, which made him look even more handsome and elegant. If not for his slightly pale face, there would be no difference between him and Ning Xuemo when she first met him. Seeing an old acquaintance again, Ning Xuemo was delighted. Your Highness, when did you come? Why did you come? Ji Yunhuang smiled. Xuemo, did you forget that I am also a disciple of the Sun Moon sect? Martial Aunt Jing'an sent me a message, asking me to come and help with the recruitment of new disciples. I just arrived this morning and am about to go to the competition. Let's go together. As he spoke, he held her hand and walked away. There were so many disciples in the Sun Moon sect, so it should be easy for them to take care of the new disciples, right? Why did they have to call Ji Yunhuang back? Perhaps there was some reason behind it. Although Ning Xuemore had stayed in the Sun-Moon sect for a short period of time, she still did not know much about the rules of the Sun-Moon sect. He didn't think too much about it. Ji Yunhuang held her hand and walked a few steps. Suddenly, she seemed to have sensed something. She turned around and saw an extremely beautiful and graceful woman standing behind them. She had slender eyebrows and pretty eyes, and she wore a lake blue dress. She stood there with a layer of faint mist around her, making her look like a fairy. She had obviously come with Ji Yunhuang. At this moment, she was standing there with pursed lips as she looked at Ji Yunhuang. To be more precise, her gaze fell on Ji Yunhuang and Ning Xuemore's hands, which were holding each other's hands. A trace of sadness flashed through her eyes. Ning Xuemore's heart skipped a beat as she suddenly realized something. She calmly pulled her hand back and asked with a smile, "Your Highness, who is this?" Ji Yunhuang faintly glanced at the young woman and said in a calm voice, "Xuemore. She is the daughter of the Tianqing Castle's castle lord Tian Xueqing." Ning Xuemore had heard about the matter between Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueqing from Yang Ziyuan. It seemed that the Tianqing Castle's castle lord wanted to give Tian Xueqing to Han Shanyu, but Han Shanyu gave her to Ji Yunhuang instead. At that time, Ji Yunhuang did not refuse. After that, Le Hin Thai and the Tianqing Castle's castle lord finalized the marriage on the spot. In other words, this Miss Tian Xueqing was the future crown prince's wife. However, wasn't Ji Yunhuang treating this standard crown prince's wife too coldly? He pulled another woman's hand and ran away, leaving his fiancée hanging there. Ning Xuemore was about to say something, but Ji Yunhuang had already said to Tian Xueqing, "Miss Xueqing, she is this prince's friend, Ning Xuemore." Ning Xuemore could also tell that this Miss Tian Xueqing was no longer a virgin. It was obvious that she had already had intimate contact with Ji Yunhuang. Looks like the effects of cauldrons really can't be underestimated. Ning Xuemore was truly happy for Ji Yunhuang. Originally, he had suffered such heavy injuries that it would have taken him at least 2 to 3 years to fully recover. However, with Miss Tian Xueqing by his side, it could be considered a blessing in disguise. She looked at Ji Yunhuang and then at Tian Xueqing. She couldn't help but smile. "Both of you should have good news soon, right? When are you going to invite me to your wedding?" Ji Yunhuang's expression slightly changed. Before he could say anything, Tian Xueqing smiled. "Our wedding will be in a month's time. This time, Your Highness came here for 2 reasons. First, it's to inform the new disciples. Second, it's to inform the other disciples. When the time comes, I hope that Miss Ning will grace us with your presence. A month's time? That's so rushed." Ning Xuemore calculated for a moment. She had time in a month's time. She immediately nodded. "All right. I'll definitely be there." Chapter 851. Ji Yunhuang's thin lips slightly pursed. He seemed to be unwilling to talk about this matter. He raised his hand and grabbed Ning Xuemore's hand. "Let's not talk about this anymore. I'll bring you to the arena first." Ning Xuemore took a step back and pulled her hand away. She smiled and said, "Your Highness, I can't go with you this time." "Why?" Ji Yunhuang raised his eyebrows. Ning Xuemore said, "I'm also one of the new disciples this time. Since Your Highness is in charge of the new disciples, it won't be good for me to go with Your Highness. Your Highness and Miss Tian Xueqing can go first. Prince Helian and I will follow behind." Helian Xiao smiled faintly. "That's true. Senior brother Ji, please take the crown princess first. Xuemore and I will follow behind you." Ji Yunhuang had no choice but to take Tian Xueqing and leave first. Ning Xuemore sighed in relief. Ji Yunhuang seemed to have not given up on her. However, he had Tian Xueqing by his side. As time passed, he would naturally change his mind. "Xuemore, will you still marry Master Han in the future? Will you still be his concubine?" Helian Xiao suddenly asked. Ning Xuemore's mind was elsewhere. When she heard his question, she subconsciously replied, "I won't." As long as she succeeded in becoming his disciple this time, she naturally wouldn't need to be his concubine. As long as no one messed with her, she should be able to do her best and successfully become his disciple. That's great. Helian Xiao beamed with joy. Like I said, how can someone like you be someone's concubine? It's too humiliating for you. Moreover, you're still young. You don't have to decide on your marriage so early. All right, let's go quickly. It'll be bad if we're late. Take her by the hand and run. Ning Xuemo was speechless. She looked at his obviously excited face and her heart was slightly moved. Did she intentionally or unintentionally give this little guy the wrong signal? After many rounds of elimination, only 20 disciples were left. These 20 disciples would all remain in the Sun-Moon sect. The reason why the final competition was held was because the top 5 disciples could freely choose their masters according to their order. They could also become the disciples of the Sun-Moon sect's current 5 Emperor Realm direct disciples. As for the others, they would be chosen by the elders who wanted to take them in as disciples according to their aptitude. This time, because Di Zun also wanted to take in a disciple, he chose the top 6. The first one would become Di Zun's disciple and be personally taught martial arts by Di Zun. The next 5 would then choose their own master. Since the master was willing to choose a good disciple, the disciple would naturally be willing to choose a good master. Among the 5 emperor's direct disciples, Yelu Jing'an was the most famous and had the most number of people who wanted to become his disciple. Therefore, if there were no accidents, the second-place winner would become his disciple. All the fighting equipment on the Celestial Light stage had been prepared. The Celestial Light stage was extremely large. It was the size of a football field and was divided into 2 arenas. The 20 new disciples were divided into 10 groups of 2. The losers would be eliminated and the winners would continue. After a few rounds, the rankings would be decided. In order to be fair, the opponents in each match were decided by drawing lots, and neither side was biased. The matches in both arenas would be faster if they were held at the same time. The arenas here were very special. Although they were called arenas, they were actually rows of densely packed icicles. Rather than calling them icicles, it was better to call them icicles. They were about 10 meters tall and the tip was not even as thick as a person's thumb. They were slippery and sharp. These icicles were arranged according to the 5 elements 8 trigrams. The disciples competing not only had to face their opponents' attacks head-on and freely jump on the icicles, they also had to be very familiar with the 5 elements 8 trigrams array. Chapter 852. Because of this perverted arrangement, this kind of competition was the best way to test the overall quality of the disciples. It was also the highlight of the selection of disciples. All the instructors who wanted to take in disciples would be present to watch and evaluate each disciple's ability in their heart. Ning Xuemo drew lots for the first time and her opponent was an Earth-rank second-rank disciple. Logically speaking, his psychokinesis and Ning Xuemo were of the same rank and level, so there should be a fierce battle. However, he did not expect that after fighting with her for less than 5 minutes, he would be dazzled by her strange movements. He was not prepared and was kicked off the ice cone. Ning Xuemo won this round in a clean and efficient manner, without the slightest hesitation. The disciples who were watching the battle below the stage cheered. Kirin, who was standing at the front, cheered loudly. Ning Xuemo looked down and saw Ji Yunhuang, Helian Xiao, and even Yelu Jing'an below the stage. Even Feng Jiaxin was watching. There was no need to ask, she was here to check out her martial arts. Feng Jiaxin and Ning Xuemo's eyes met. Feng Jiaxin snorted and walked away to watch the competition on the other side of the stage. Ning Xuemo jumped off the ice cone and replaced the other disciples. Xuemo, I didn't expect your psychokinesis to increase so quickly. Ji Yunhuang walked over and congratulated her. He handed over a handkerchief and said, "Come, wipe your face." Ning Xuemo's match was the most relaxed. Not a single strand of her hair was out of place, and not a single drop of sweat could be seen on her fair face. Only her cheeks were slightly flushed, making her look even more stunning. Ning Xuemo took the handkerchief and wiped her face, Thank you, Your Highness. Just as she was about to return the handkerchief, she suddenly remembered Ji Yunhuang's abnormal misophobia. She paused for a moment. Ji Yunhuang took the initiative and took the handkerchief. He folded it and carefully put it into his sleeve. Ning Xuemore felt slightly uncomfortable. Although she did not have any feelings for Ji Yunhuang, his actions were too obvious. Especially when the future crown princess was standing beside him. Wasn't he afraid that his crown prince consort would be jealous if he openly showed his goodwill to a woman? Ning Xuemore calmly took a step back and was about to find an excuse to leave. Ji Yunhuang looked at her with a smile that was not a smile. Xuemore, do you really want to distance yourself from me? Ning Xuemore looked at him in confusion. Call me by my name. I don't like it when you call me Your Highness the Crown Prince. Ji Yunhuang's eyes were deep and serene as he took a step forward. Ning Xuemore frowned slightly. She glanced at Tian Xueqing, who was standing beside Ji Yunhuang. Tian Xueqing pursed her red lips and stood there with her eyes lowered. She did not seem to care about what was happening, but her complexion seemed to be a little paler than before. Ning Xuemore sighed inwardly. Ji Yunhuang had completely neglected this crown prince consort. He clearly had physical contact with her, but he could still be so cold. No wonder it was said that men's sex and love could be separated. Now it seemed that it was true. She playfully patted Ji Yunhuang's shoulder. Brother Yunhuang, you're going to have a family soon. You can't pick up girls outside anymore. Xueqing is a good girl. Treat her better in the future. She smiled and walked away. Ji Yunhuang was slightly startled. Ning Xuemore had already run to the stage to watch the competition. He turned his head to look at Tian Xueqing. The smile on his lips disappeared. Can you not keep following this prince? He really could not leave her now, but there was no need for her to follow him step by step like a shadow, right? Chapter 853. Ji Yunhuang's heart was vaguely irritated. He looked at the pale Tian Xueqing and coldly said, "Are you afraid that this prince will treat other women well?" Deliberately watching from the side. "Let this prince tell you, even if I marry you as the crown prince's consort in the future, you won't be my only woman." He was the crown prince and the future emperor. If there were no accidents, he would have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards in the future. Of course, if he could marry the woman he liked, that was an exception. Tian Xueqing's face became even paler. She took a step back and said, "Your Highness, Xueqing understands. Xueqing will not interfere with your matters. If that's the case, then don't keep following this prince." Ji Yunhuang turned around and left. Tian Xueqing subconsciously followed him for 2 steps and stopped. She did not know anyone around her. She had been raised as a medicine person since she was young. She was almost isolated from the world and was not good at socializing. At this moment, she was thrown into the crowd by Ji Yunhuang. Although the people around her were very polite to her because of Ji Yunhuang, she still felt lonely. She slowly walked out of the crowd and found a secluded corner to enjoy the scenery. He is obviously your man, but you can only watch as he is taken away by another woman. Do you feel sad? A voice came from behind her. Tian Xueqing turned around and saw a white-clothed woman walking over. Tian Xueqing's memory was very good. She recognized that this woman was one of the new disciples. Her name was Feng Jiaxin, and her martial arts were very good. Other than Ning Xuemore, her chances of winning the championship were also quite high. Feng Jiaxin's words clearly had the intention to sow discord. Tian Xueqing glanced at her and did not say anything. Feng Jiaxin sighed. That woman is a vixen. She is especially good at seducing men. She is obviously someone's concubine, but she still has an unclear relationship with several men. Men are cheap. What they can't get is always the best. They don't look at a beauty like you by their side and only like to look at those wild flowers. Tian Xueqing faintly frowned and took a step back. She lightly said, "Sorry, I will not talk about people behind their backs. Miss Feng, I don't understand, and I don't want to understand." She turned around and walked into the crowd again. She didn't want to be alone with Feng Jiaxin. Feng Jiaxin was speechless. She had originally wanted to find an ally who hated Ning Xuemo and find an opportunity to make things difficult for Ning Xuemo. However, she did not expect that the other party would completely ignore her good intentions and leave just like that. She got snubbed and was a bit unhappy. Just as she was about to join the crowd, she raised her head and saw Yelu Jing'an standing not too far away. She was lightly playing a bamboo flute in her hand and was looking in her direction. Her heart jumped. Although Yelu Jing'an's position was high, he was handsome and elegant as jade. No matter where he stood, he would attract the attention of a large group of female disciples, and Feng Jiaxin was one of them. Her wishful thinking was to take the ancestor as her master and become martial siblings with Yelu Jing'an. When the time came, she would find all sorts of reasons to get along with Yelu Jing'an and think of a way to woo him. Then, they would return to the Fengyi kingdom to seize power. She had always thought highly of herself and felt that she was more than enough to be a match for Yelu Jing'an. Therefore, in the depths of her heart, she had already regarded Yelu Jing'an as hers. At this moment, when she saw him looking in her direction, she felt both nervous and excited. She was nervous because she was afraid that her words to sow discord between Tian Xueqing had been heard by him. She was excited because it turned out that he was still paying attention to her. Chapter 854. Feng Jiaxin subconsciously straightened her clothes and tidied her hair. Her posture was elegant, and she strove to make her every movement seem like a noble young lady. She then raised her head to look at Yelu Jing'an, but she discovered that he had already disappeared. She looked around and finally found him in another arena. Then, her eyes narrowed slightly. She clenched her fist. Yelu Jing'an was standing beside Ning Xuemo, talking to her. Ji Yunhuang and Helian Xiao were also standing there. The four of them were watching the competition on the stage, talking and laughing. Feng Jiaxin. Hatred surged like waves in her chest. Why? Why was everyone so good to that girl? Her psychokinesis was obviously not as high as her, and her appearance was not as beautiful as her. Why was she able to gain the favor of so many men? Vixen. A standard coquettish vixen. Feng Jiaxin cursed in her heart. Today, she must defeat this coquettish vixen and completely blow off steam. Let these blind stinky men see that she, Feng Jiaxin, was the best in this world. No woman in this world could compare to even a toe of hers. The later rounds of the competition each had their own merits. It was also brilliant and varied, and the progress was also fast and slow. Fortunately, it was held in 2 arenas, so the progress wasn't too slow. The competition quickly progressed to the second round. This time, Ning Xuemo's opponent was an Earth Stage Level 3 disciple. Although this person's psychokinesis was higher than Ning Xuemo's, his array wasn't as proficient as Ning Xuemo's. In addition, his Qinggong wasn't as good as Ning Xuemo's. So after 10 minutes, he was completely disrupted by Ning Xuemo's strange footwork. His heart panicked, and he missed a step and fell down the ice cone. Ning Xuemo won again. Just like this, round after round of competition, the morning passed, and then the afternoon passed. Ning Xuemo also competed a few rounds. Although it was more difficult to win each round, she was still the one who won. If Ning Xuemo had broken through the 6 levels on her own, some people still suspected that someone had let her win. But now, after seeing her defeat her opponents again and again with various kinds of martial arts, everyone's impression of her had changed from being suspicious to being convinced. Originally, the people of the Sun Moon sect were not particularly interested in the competition between new disciples. In previous years, apart from a few revered masters who wanted to take in new disciples, the others would come in 2s and 3s. After all, everyone was busy. Besides, how good could the new disciples be? In the eyes of these old birds, the martial arts of these newbies were not even worth looking at. There was nothing worth looking at. But this year was a bit special. Firstly, there were geniuses among geniuses like Feng Jiaxin and Helian Xiao in this batch of new disciples. Secondly, there was suddenly an unexpected dark horse like Ning Xuemo. The fact that a former trash had passed 6 stages in a row had shocked all the disciples of the Sun-Moon sect. Her name had spread to every corner of the Sun-Moon sect overnight. They all wanted to see the true face of this dark horse. So early in the morning, the people who came to the Star Brilliance platform to watch the competition could be described as a sea of people. Every time Ning Xuemore competed, there would be countless eyes watching and analyzing her. Ning Xuemore was someone who was used to seeing the wind and waves. No matter how many people stared at her, she would still be able to act as if nothing had happened and perform normally. And those little girls and youths who were fighting with her were under great pressure. With so many people watching, they were nervous and excited. They were excited because their skills would no longer be buried. They had finally become the focus of everyone's attention. Chapter 855. What made the new disciples nervous was that their opponent, Ning Xuemore, was too freakish. Her martial arts were even more varied, and she used different martial arts against different opponents. Sometimes, she used speed to fight speed, and other times, she defended motionlessly like a mountain. A sudden move was fatal. Her fighting style was not only novel to the new disciples, even those old birds of the Jianghu who had practiced martial arts for many years in the Sun-Moon sect were full of admiration. Trash. Those who said this girl was trash were simply blind. They couldn't be any more blind. In the evening, the top 6 of the finals were finally decided. Ning Xuemore was one of them. Ning Xuemore's opponent this time was the son of a general. He had followed his father on the battlefield since he was young, and had already fought with countless experts at a young age, so his battle experience was very rich. Psychokinesis, Earth Tier Level 3, Single Spirit Root, Metal Attribute. Ning Xuemore had seen him fight before. His moves weren't flashy, but every move and style was very practical, attacking the enemy's vital points. Although he wasn't old, his murderous aura was domineering. When his opponent was stared at by his cold eyes, their hearts would first tremble. At this moment, he was standing at the top of the icicle, his black clothes contrasting with his handsome face. He cupped his hands towards Ning Xuemore and said, "Please." His palms suddenly turned pale gold, and his body moved, like a ball of flowing light. He attacked Ning Xuemore. The cold and hard metal aura hit her in the face. Ning Xuemore spun in a circle, and her footsteps shifted slightly, avoiding his killing move. The two of them fought together. The higher the level of the competition, the more interesting it was. Especially Ning Xuemore's side, there was a sea of people watching. Experts were as common as clouds. When everyone saw this cold youth make a move, they knew he was extraordinary. Previously, when he fought with others, he didn't seem to be very outstanding. His moves were all normal, but this time, it was as if he had suddenly turned on a cheat. His movements were like lightning, his aura was like a rainbow, and his moves varied. He had obviously been hiding his true strength. Now that he was fighting with Ning Xuemore, he finally displayed all his abilities. Yelu Jing'an twirled the bamboo flute in her hand, her eyes landing on the youth. This youth was a talent. Yelu Jing'an summoned Feng Lianyi and asked for all the information on this youth. This youth's name was Yi Xian, and he was from Xianming. He was the son of a general, and his father had died on the battlefield when he was 11 years old. He was the one who carried his father's body and fought his way out of the encirclement. He killed hundreds of people and was known as the little god of slaughter on the battlefield. After his father died, he managed the general's mansion all by himself. It was not easy for him. His experience was similar to Ning Xuemore's. The difference was that he had been a genius since he was young. He had even inherited his father's teachings. He was also highly regarded by the king of Xianming nation. Before he came to the Sun-Moon sect, he had already been conferred the title of Xian General by the king. He was one of the earliest to be conferred the title of general. After coming to the Sun-Moon sect, his results in the 6 trials weren't too outstanding. It was mainly because his skills in mechanisms were slightly weaker, which lowered his overall standard. His total score was around the 15th place. Added with the fact that he usually kept a low profile, The elders of the Sun-Moon sect didn't pay much attention to him at the beginning. It wasn't until now that everyone's eyes lit up. Yelu Jing'an looked at his pale gold palms and nodded inwardly. Although this child's talent in psychokinesis wasn't the highest, he was definitely the one who was the best at fighting. He also used his metal-type psychokinesis to perfection. He leaped on the icicles, leaving uneven patches of pale gold in the places he passed. They were embedded in the icicles and sparkled under the starlight. Chapter 856. Yelu Jing'an's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly understood Yi Xian's intention. With these bumpy metal particles, the smoothness of the icicle tip would decrease. This would allow him to stand more firmly on it. However, the two of them would constantly change their positions during the fight. Ning Xuemo would probably be able to step on the icicles that he embedded with the metal particles and take advantage of it. Perhaps these metal particles had other uses. Yi Xian's murderous aura was extremely heavy. Moreover, his attacks were extremely swift and fierce. Not long after Ning Xuemo started fighting with him, she was forced to retreat step by step. She focused on defense and occasionally attacked, but it was useless. She couldn't threaten Yi Xian at all. Everyone below the stage held their breaths as they watched. People like Helian Xiao, Ji Yunhuang, and the others secretly broke out in a cold sweat for Ning Xuemo. Yi Xian was of the metal attribute. After his hands turned a light gold color, they could cut through gold and jade. His hands were weapons. They were the most domineering weapons. Ning Xuemo's main attribute was of the wood attribute. She used a green vine whip. Metal restrained wood. Every time Yi Xian's hands touched her vine whip, he would easily cut off a section. Her whip would occasionally hit him, but it wouldn't even leave a mark. Yi Xian's attribute just happened to restrain Ning Xuemo's attribute. His level was also one level higher than hers. In addition, he had more battle experience than Ning Xuemo. He was also ruthless and his moves were straightforward. It looked like he was Ning Xuemo's nemesis. This time, Ning Xuemo was really going to lose. Karine was so nervous that her scales were standing on end. She was afraid that Master would be distracted and didn't even dare to cheer. Master wouldn't really lose, right? If she lost, she wouldn't be able to take Di Zun as her master anymore. This fight was especially long. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. The two of them still hadn't decided who would win. However, it was strange. Yi Xian seemed to be gaining the upper hand step by step and was forcing Ning Xuemo to retreat. However, no matter what, he couldn't break through Ning Xuemo's defense. She was like the ocean. No matter how fierce the waves were, she could turn them into nothingness. Her every move was soft and powerful. Her moves seemed slow, but they were smooth and impenetrable. Although Yi Xian's storm-like attacks were powerful, they obviously couldn't last long. After another hour, his attacks gradually slowed down. Now is the time. Ning Xuemo's eyes flashed. She suddenly changed moves. She went from defense to offense. Defense. His moves followed a strange path. One person turned into 2 people, and 2 people turned into 4 people. After a short moment, Yi Xian felt that Ning Xuemo's shadow was everywhere. What move was this? Yi Xian's eyes widened. He had never seen such a move before. He couldn't tell which one was her real body and which one was her illusory body. This move was something Ning Xuemo had learned in the modern era. Her inspiration came from anime and manga. It was inspired by anime and was considered a type of shadow clone jutsu. Actually, it wasn't a real clone. It was just that she moved too fast, so the human eye had a temporary visual lag. When her speed reached a certain level and she took a specific route, it felt like one person had transformed into countless people. Yi Xian was dizzy from her clones, and his eyes darkened. Yi Xian watched as one of her figures landed on the icicle he had embedded with metal particles. He flicked his finger. The icicle under the figure suddenly exploded. Countless metal particles bounced up and flew toward the figure that landed on it. "Master, be careful," Karine shouted in fear. Chapter 857. Poof. When the metal particles hit the person instantly disappeared. However, a green light flew over, and all the metal particles hit the green light. Yi Xian decided to detonate all the icicles he stepped on, and the metal particles shot toward all the Ning Xuemore figures. He didn't believe that all the icicles he shot at were illusions. As long as one of them was real, he would win. Poof, poof, poof. The metal particles filled the air and danced in the air. It was a spectacular sight. Countless of Ning Xuemore's clones were smashed to pieces by the metal particles. However, the green vine whip continued to revolve around her, blocking all of the metal particles. Finally, there was one Ning Xuemore figure on the icicles. In the end, all the icicles embedded with the metal particles were detonated by Yi Xian, and he destroyed half of the icicle arena. Detonating the icicles to release the metal particles also consumed a lot of mental strength, so Yi Xian was a bit out of breath. "You're done detonating?" Ning Xuemore smiled as she held the trembling green vine whip. Yi Xian looked up abruptly and saw the girl across from him smiling nonchalantly like a blooming flower. She shook the whip. The whip was embedded with countless metal particles, and the original green vine whip became a bumpy metal whip. "Your treasures are pretty good, but I don't dare to take them. I'll return them to you." Ning Xuemore gripped the whip in her hand and abruptly swung it. Countless metal particles shot back at Yi Xian like a heavenly maiden scattering flowers. Yi Xian had detonated them one by one, so the metal particles weren't concentrated when they attacked Ning Xuemore. However, Ning Xuemore had detonated them all at once. The thousands of metal particles were like thousands of hidden weapons and were as dense as hornets as they surrounded Yi Xian from head to toe. "Nice." Kirin cheered loudly from below. Master's method of giving someone a taste of their own medicine was well used. Yi Xian was also shocked. As a metal type, he wasn't afraid of wood-type weapons, but Ning Xuemore had hit back with his own metal-type hidden weapons. When a metal element met a metal element, one would still be injured if they were hit. He was also a character. His hands danced like a whirlwind, slapping away the incoming metal particles and catching them. Even so, he was still hit in several non-vital areas of his body, and it was burning with pain. He took a deep breath. It didn't matter. The place where he was shot wouldn't affect the fight. He could still continue fighting. Just as he was about to charge forward again, he suddenly felt a strange numbness and itchiness in all the places where the metal particles were. The numbness and itchiness were bone-piercing, causing his legs to go soft, and he staggered. Coincidentally, Ning Xuemore's whip flew over, wrapped around his waist, and flung him out. "Farewell, I won't see you off." Yi Xian stumbled on the ground and steadied himself. The numbness and itchiness on his body finally disappeared. He was safe and sound, but he had also lost. The spectating crowd was silent for a moment before erupting into cheers again for Ning Xuemore's victory. However, Yi Xian looked up at the young girl standing on the icicle with a conflicted gaze. He knew that the metal particles that Ning Xuemore had just shot back at him were poisonous, but the poison only had the effect of numbing and itching for a moment. It didn't actually hurt him. Also, she hadn't been unscrupulous when she attacked. At the very least, she hadn't whipped him off the icicle and allowed him to land safely so he wouldn't embarrass himself too much. Yi Xian had killed his way out on the battlefield, so every time he attacked, he didn't leave any way out for his opponent. He could even make the green vines grow rapidly and quickly form a net to envelop people. In short, he could easily use anything related to wood. On the other hand, Ning Xuemore had an Earth Rank Level 2 attribute, so the things she could casually condense were very limited. He could only form vine whips and wooden sticks, but not countless green vines at the same time. In this way, she would be at a disadvantage in the fight. If it was someone else who had Earth Tier Telekinesis Level 2 or Level 5, they would have no chance of winning. They would be PK'd in a matter of minutes. They would not be a match at all. On the other hand, Ning Xuemore relied on her peculiar movements and moves to turn danger into safety time and time again. Although there were many people watching the battle below the arena, no one made any noise. They all held their breaths and watched the battle between the geniuses on stage. At this time, no matter if it was Ning Xuemore or Helian Xiao, both of them had brought out all their skills, dazzling those experts who were watching the battle. Feng Jiaxin also stood below the arena and watched attentively. She was looking for the weaknesses of these two people's movements and tactics. Chapter 859. This was the advantage of making a move later. She could observe her opponent's fight to her heart's content to search for her opponent's weakness. When it was her turn to make a move, she would have a clear idea of what to do. Feng Jiaxin's main focus was still on Ning Xuemore. She was most afraid of her, and the one she hated the most to step on was her. After an hour, Feng Jiaxin became more and more alarmed as she watched. She had already seen Ning Xuemore's moves so many times, but she still couldn't find the pattern of her opponent's move. It was ethereal, strange, and ever-changing. She had already made her move, but you couldn't guess what her next move would be. Although her psychokinesis was Earth Stage Level 2, she could display the power of Earth Stage Level 3 or 4. Moreover, the more she used it, the more abnormal her intuition was. In addition to her strange way of using it was simply impossible to guard against. Helian Xiao's psychokinesis was so high, but he was only evenly matched with her and didn't gain the upper hand. Looking at Ning Xuemore's moves, Feng Jiaxin's heart was beating like a drum. She originally thought that when she almost lost to Ning Xuemore when she was flying across Lotus Leaf Lake, it was because the other party just happened to know the layout of those lotus leaves, so she ran fast. If they really fought, Ning Xuemore's actual ability might not be that strong. She might not lose to her. Now it seemed that even if she went up on stage and fought with her, she might not win. It could be said that there was an 80 to 90% chance that she would lose to her. If she lost to her again, Feng Jiaxin couldn't imagine it. This was a result she absolutely couldn't accept. So no matter what method she used, she had to win. She must win. Her fingers clenched the pill hidden in her sleeve and her eyes drooped. She would take this pill at the most crucial moment. Fight for a chance. Time slipped by as Ning Xuemore and Helian Xiao fought, and then slipped by. Both of them made strange moves and brilliant moves. From time to time, there would be applause and comments from the audience. Although it was already late at night, the Star Brilliance stage was still bustling. This fierce fight lasted for more than 4 hours. Converting it to the current time, it was a full 5 hours. Until the next day at 1 a.m., the two finally decided the winner. Helian Xiao was defeated by a single move and leaped off the arena. When he landed on the ground, he staggered a little before regaining his footing and laughing heartily. Ha ha ha, this is great. How satisfying. I haven't fought to my heart's content in a long time. Then, he cupped his fists towards Ning Xuemore on the stage. Xuemore, I admit defeat to you. After fighting for so long, he was really tired. He walked 2 steps and sat down on a big rock beside him. He didn't want to get up again. It was clearly the beginning of winter, but he was drenched in sweat, and his forehead was sweating profusely. He wiped his face with his hand and looked at Ning Xuemore on the stage. He was worried about her. After such a fight, a man like him was already so tired that his legs were weak and numb. Ning Xuemore, a delicate little girl, must be even more tired, and she still had to fight Feng Jiaxin. Ning Xuemore was at a disadvantage. On the contrary, Feng Jiaxin, that white lotus, took advantage of it. Ning Xuemore was indeed tired, but more importantly, she was also hungry. After such a large amount of activity, she was so hungry that her chest was sticking to her back. But luckily, she was a secret agent. She had the word endure in her bones. No matter how tired or hungry she was, she could endure it. Of course, she was also tired. But in her past life as a secret agent, who knew how many times she had experienced this kind of battle? Chapter 860. She had once fought with someone for a day and a night. In the end, the other party couldn't hold on any longer and was killed by her. Of course, she was also paralyzed. After that incident, she slept like a corpse in her little nest for a day and a night. Today, she had fought a total of 5 matches. The last match was especially exhausting. She was so tired that she wanted to lie down and sleep. But her excellent agent qualities allowed her to act as if nothing had happened even if she was tired or hungry when she didn't complete her mission. She could also maintain a good mental state, making others unable to see any signs of fatigue. Even though her injured leg had been healed by the ancestors' spirit medicine, the recovery time was still very short. Once she moved vigorously, there would still be some pain. Her movements today weren't ordinary vigorous, so the pain in her leg was also aggravating. Standing on the icicle made her injured leg almost tremble. Although the light at night was very dim, the people present were all outstanding in martial arts. Their night vision was very strong. Even in the dark, there wasn't much difference from daytime. Feng Jiaoxin's night vision was also very strong. Her eyes were fixed on Ning Xuemore. She could even see the sweat on Ning Xuemore's forehead. Her heart stirred. She didn't wait for the Sun Moon sect disciple in charge of the competition to announce the start of the competition. She had already flown up and cupped her hands towards Ning Xuemore. She planned to say a few polite words before seizing the opportunity to start the fight. Yelu Jing'an suddenly spoke up from below the stage. The competition will be temporarily suspended for 2 hours. It will start again after 2 hours. Feng Jiaoxin was stunned and blurted out, "Why?" Yelu Jing'an didn't even look at her and said indifferently, "Do I need to explain to you, a junior?" Her words choked Feng Jiaoxin and made her speechless. Everyone nodded their heads one after another. Just now, the martial arts competition lasted for too long. The people on the stage had used up a lot of their energy. If they were to immediately start the second round, it would be too unfair to Ning Xuemore. She would be able to rest for 2 hours and recover a little bit. Feng Jiaoxin's wishful thinking fell through. She endured, but in the end, she couldn't. Lord Protector, the competition has a rule. When the last 3 people fight, they have to fight continuously. Isn't it too unreasonable to stop midway? Yelu Jing'an's gaze finally landed on her. Is there a rule in the competition that doesn't allow for breaks? Feng Jiaoxin was dumbfounded. Indeed, there was no such rule. Yelu Jing'an's voice grew colder. Or is it to say that Miss Feng is eager to take advantage of this and fight with her while she's tired? This way you can win and be glorious. Feng Jiaoxin's pretty face turned slightly red. Jiaoxin doesn't have such thoughts. The competition this time is to select the true top talents, not just the results. Therefore, it's better to be a bit more fair to convince the masses. No matter who wins or loses, no one else has anything to say. Yelu Jing'an added. At this point, Feng Jiaoxin had nothing to refute. She reluctantly jumped down from the ring. Ning Xuemore also jumped down from the arena. Kirin immediately rushed over. "Master, are you tired? Are you hungry? Lean on me." Another disciple who was in charge of the food rushed over with a food box. "Miss Ning, this is the food prepared for you. Please eat some." Opening the food box, there were several side dishes and a bowl of porridge that was steaming hot. "Miss Ning, you fought for so long and used up too much energy. I have an ice heart fruit here that can relieve you a little." A Sun Moon sect disciple handed over a purple-red fruit. Chapter 861. Lady Ning, I have snow spring water here. It can calm your mind and help you quench your thirst. Another person handed over a gourd of water. Lady Ning, countless disciples surrounded Ning Xuemore, expressing their goodwill and handing over many things to her. Strong people were respected, especially this strong person was a young lady who used her own ability to fight. Her martial arts might not be the most outstanding in the eyes of those experienced people, but her spirit moved everyone. It made everyone who saw her go from indifferent to having a whole new level of respect. The Sun Moon sect did not lack strong people, but not every strong person was worthy of respect. Only Ning Xuemore, this kind of person who never admitted defeat, dared to fight, and did things in an open and above-board manner, was worthy of their respect. Moreover, Ning Xuemore, at this moment, because of the continuous competition and the loss of blood, her face was pale. She stood there charmingly, looking a little weak. It made people want to take pity on her, to love her, to pamper her. Respect, love, these kinds of contradictory feelings were rolling in many people's hearts, making them want to give their best to her. Ning Xuemore looked at the hands around her, and the things in their hands, and her eyes suddenly felt a little hot. Since she came to this world, no matter where she went, she would always receive the world's malice, but here, although she met some malice, most people were still very good to her. She used her own charm to win everyone's respect. Feng Jiaoxin was not far away looking, she was simply about to explode in anger. Those disciples who used to surround her were all gathered around Ning Xuemore, making her seem a little lonely. At this moment, seeing those people giving things to Ning Xuemore, the blood of jealousy rushed to her head, making her head explode. Feng Jiaoxin could not help but sneer. Lady Ning should indeed replenish her strength, but during the competition, she is not allowed to eat things that can suddenly increase her strength. The things that the senior brothers have given are naturally very good, but I don't know if there is such a thing in them. If there is such a thing, then... Hee hee. Her voice was neither loud nor soft, just enough for everyone on the Star Brilliance platform to hear. Almost everyone was disgusted by her hee. However, there were also a small number of people who felt that what she said made sense. During the competition, it was indeed forbidden for the disciples to take any medicine or food that could rapidly increase their strength. If they were discovered, the best-case scenario would be that their results would be reset to 0, and the worst-case scenario would be that they would be expelled from the Sun Moon sect and never be recruited again. There were so many people sending Ning Xuemore all kinds of food. It was hard to guarantee that there were no illegal items in them.